Chapter 1 begins with an injured female adventurer lying on the ground, watching as the Minotaur roared before her. Her body was hurt, and she could only look on as the massive creature stood in front of her. Fortunately, another male adventurer rushed in and, with a swift strike, cut off the Minotaur's arm before slashing across its chest. The Minotaur coughed up blood and collapsed onto the ground. Slowly, lights appeared around its body and then faded away, leaving behind rewards in the form of coins and a sword. After the Minotaur's death, the adventurers examined the rewards. The male adventurer remarked that it was only a regular item. Another adventurer responded that it was still not easy to obtain, as it was said that one could hunt down 50 Minotaurs and still fail to get one. The injured female adventurer called out to them, telling them not to waste time talking and that they should return to the surface. The bearded adventurer suggested that this time they should continue on to the 25th level. Suddenly, the female adventurer struck his head and told him not to look at her. A few hours later, in the same room, the ground slowly opened. A beast within the labyrinth is not born from a mother's womb. It bursts from the walls and the floor like a fountain. When existing monsters are killed, the same species will appear again on the same level at different times. They do not inherit memories or experiences. They resemble living beings, yet they are not truly alive. For this reason, the monsters in the labyrinth do not evolve, inherit traits, or grow. Once again, a Minotaur sprang from the ground. It slowly opened its eyes. In the Sazerdan labyrinth, within the kingdom of Valdemost, on level 10 in the boss room, another beast emerged on that day. The Minotaur stood with heavy breaths, looking around before moving toward the pond in the room. It lowered its head into the water and drank aggressively. After a moment, it lifted its head and drew in a deep breath. The Minotaur clenched its teeth and roared. It slammed both axes onto the ground, shattering the surface and sending debris into the air. Its face was filled with anger, its eyes sharp as it sensed something behind it. An adventurer had entered the room. The Minotaur slowly rose to its full height as the adventurer stood ready. She recognized that the creature before her was the boss of the 10th level, the Minotaur. The adventurer was Alina, a level 16 Class D adventurer. As the Minotaur moved, the ground beneath its feet cracked and broke. Alina remained focused while the Minotaur faced her, both axes raised and ready. She was struck by its size and by the tremendous pressure that seemed to pour from it, something that felt like rage and hatred. She drew in a deep breath and steadied herself, forcing her thoughts to settle. She had prepared for this day by learning strategies from a veteran who had extensive experience defeating Minotaurs. She had equipped herself carefully and made sure to bring enough recovery medicine. Alina was fully prepared. If she could defeat this Minotaur on her own, she would surely be promoted to Class C. Advancing to Class C would bring more profitable quests. With better rewards, her father could regain his strength, and her mother would be able to smile again. She reassured herself once more. She carried the protection of a talisman. She believed that a god stood on her side. If one prayed sincerely and from the depths of the heart, that god would answer. She entrusted herself to Bora, the goddess of earth, hoping for protection. At that moment, the Minotaur roared and charged toward her. Alina moved forward as well. She shouted as she swung her sword, striking the Minotaur's arm. She quickly dodged the sweep of its axe. She cried out again and struck the same arm once more. The Minotaur let out a pained scream and slashed at her with its other axe. Alina swiftly avoided the attack and cut into its arm again. As the Minotaur cried out in pain, she stepped back, but the creature pressed forward and lunged at her. Alina waited until the final moment before dodging aside, causing the Minotaur to slam its head into the wall behind her. Alina recalled the information she had been given. She remembered the veteran explaining that Minotaurs were powerful, but slow and straightforward. They only swung their axes, thrust forward, or lunged with their horns. There was nothing complicated about their fighting style. One only needed to watch every movement carefully and anticipate their attacks, then keep striking at their arms. If both axes were removed from the Minotaur's hands, it would almost be the same as winning. With that in mind, she shouted and attacked the Minotaur's arm once more. The Minotaur screamed in pain as its arm was severed. A grin spread across Alina's face as she realized she had done it. However, in the next instant she was caught off guard. The Minotaur swung its amputated arm and struck her across the face, sending her crashing into the wall. The Minotaur clenched its teeth as it looked at its bleeding arm. While Alina struggled to recover, the creature began to gather its breath. Her eyes widened as she remembered another warning from the veteran. If a Minotaur started taking a deep breath, it was the sign of a special attack. Frenzy was a vicious move. Anyone struck by it would have their strength drained and would be left in a temporary state of dysfunction. A single blast could completely turn the tide of battle. The only way to endure it was to have health potions ready. Alina reached for her potions, but her eyes widened when she saw the shattered vials beside her. They must have broken during the previous clash. The Minotaur finished drawing in its breath and released a deafening scream. The waves of the attack rushed toward her. She watched as the waves struck her. Her eyes lost focus and her body went limp. The Minotaur lunged forward and drove its horns into her, launching her into the air. She fell back onto the ground, but her body remained frozen. The floor trembled as she saw the Minotaur slowly approach her. The veteran's words echoed in her mind. If she made a mistake, if she realized she stood no chance, she had to leave the room immediately. The boss could not leave the boss room. Adventurers needed to know when to retreat. Alina forced her body to move. She struggled to her feet and began to run. The Minotaur ground its teeth while she gasped for breath, rushing toward the exit. The creature roared as it lifted its axe behind her and brought it down, severing her leg. Alina screamed in pain as she stumbled and fell to the ground. The heavy footsteps of the Minotaur drew closer behind her. She dragged herself toward the exit, pulling her injured body forward. As the Minotaur raised its axe, she forced herself to shout and threw her body through the exit. The axe slammed against the barrier, striking it hard. The Minotaur struck the barrier again and again, but it only crackled and rumbled in response. The Minotaur stared at the exit barrier and let out a low growl. It pressed its hoof against the barrier, trying to force it open, but quickly pulled back when the surface burned it. It fixed its gaze on the exit and took deep breaths, its anger rising steadily. On the other side, it could see Alina safe for the moment, struggling to catch her breath. The Minotaur clenched its teeth as it watched her. After some time, at the exit side of the boss room, Alina pushed herself against the wall. She cried out as she tightened the tourniquet around her severed leg. Drawing in a deep breath, she slid down the wall and wept, cursing herself. She struck the talisman hanging on her chest and refused to give up. She could not accept defeat. She called upon Bora, the goddess of earth, asking for one chance, just once, to defeat the Minotaur. There was something she needed to reclaim. She begged for strength. The talisman began to glow with a faint whistling sound. Before anything more could happen, the exit barrier crackled sharply. Alina turned toward the sound and saw the Minotaur forcing its way through. One arm slowly pushed into the exit room, its flesh burning as it crossed the barrier. Her eyes widened as she watched it continue, its body scorching while it advanced. The Minotaur roared as it drove itself forward, its skin sizzling as it forced its way inside. Alina screamed as it dragged the rest of its body through. Once fully inside, it stumbled a step forward. She could not move. The thought repeated in her mind that the boss was not supposed to leave the boss room. It was impossible. This monster was beyond facing. The Minotaur seized her body and lifted her into the air. She saw its face melting from the burns. Before she could react, it roared and swung her down, crushing her head against the floor. Blood spilled out as faint lights slowly surrounded her. The Minotaur's entire body throbbed, hissed, and sizzled, but it did not release her. It tightened its grip. Its body began to deteriorate, one arm crumbling away while its horns broke apart. It clenched its teeth and roared, caught between pain and victory as its form continued to fall apart. This was the Minotaur's craving. From the moment it awakened, it felt a thirst as vast as the ocean. Even after wetting its throat, even after fighting and crushing the female warrior, the burning inside did not fade. It remained fierce and consuming, like anger or hatred. It was hunger. Within that hunger was a demand for more. More battles. More enemies. More power to kill. It desired strength without end. As its body slowly crumbled away, a voice answered. The goddess Bora declared that the wish had been heard and granted. At once, a light enveloped the Minotaur's deteriorating form. Gradually, its body began to regenerate. Bones reformed, followed by flesh and skin. Its face took shape again. The goddess explained that the light was granted by a god and carried blessings meant only for humans, part of divine grace. Grace was something gained through the accumulation of experience points earned in battle. It restored physical wounds and eased mental strain at the same time, rebuilding the body into something far stronger. It was a ceremonial growth. The Minotaur's strength increased. The room trembled as the light slowly faded. When it disappeared, the creature had changed. Its horns were thicker and more solid, its arms more powerful, its teeth sharper. It clenched its hand tightly, still driven by the same hunger for more fights, more enemies, even stronger opponents to face. In the Sazerdan Labyrinth, on the 10th floor, something new had come into existence that day. A beast had been born. The creatures of the labyrinth were not meant to evolve, inherit, or grow. Yet this one had defied that common belief. It became a unique being that overturned what was thought to be certain. In time, it would be known with awe and reverence as an uncontrollable, unpredictable, and completely abnormal beast, the king of the labyrinth. Labyrinths were mysterious spaces that existed all over the world. It was no exaggeration to say that they had built the accumulated glory and prosperity of humanity as it stood today. An adventurer had once claimed that within the labyrinth lay great wealth, distinguished glory, explosive power, and rare items said to house the gods themselves. According to that belief, anything one desired could be obtained there. At that moment, empowered by overwhelming strength, the Minotaur brought his axe crashing down onto another monster, cleaving through it with raw and brutal force. Even after the strike, he was not satisfied. He wanted more. He longed for more enemies to face, more battles to fight. This took place on the 10th level of the Sazeradan Labyrinth. Humanity remained unaware of the disaster unfolding in that place. From the very depths of the ground, a beast burst forth. Its nature was one of extreme ferocity, a creature driven by instinct and completely out of control. After exterminating the creature, the Minotaur tore out its heart and tried to eat it. However, the heart dissolved into light and transformed into an item along with a few coins. In the labyrinth, whether it was a person or a magical beast, once death came, the body disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only items and money. The Minotaur was starving. He stomped his hoof and roared in frustration. Anger weighed heavily on him. He regarded the item as worthless junk. In his mind, he had won. He wanted meat. He demanded the spoils of war. Then he noticed a pack of monster wolves behind him. The wolves charged toward him as a group. As they drew closer, the Minotaur swung his axe with force, but the wolves avoided the strike. One wolf slipped behind him and lunged at the Minotaur's back, sinking its teeth into him. At once, the rest of the wolves followed, leaping in and attacking from every direction. The Minotaur swung his axe wildly around himself, striking out in all directions to defend his body. A wolf suddenly lunged at him from the front, but he caught it mid-attack. He clamped his jaws down, crushing its entire head and upper jaw. Grabbing its tail, he pulled with force and tore the head clean from the body. The remaining wolves froze at the sight. Holding the wolf's body in his hands, he took a bite and ate part of it. Just like before, the flesh vanished into light and turned into items and coins. The 4 remaining wolves circled him. They snarled and prepared themselves before lunging together. Moments later, the Minotaur walked away, carrying the clear sign that he had defeated the pack. His body was covered with scratches and bite marks from the fight. Frustration lingered in him as he thought about how the wolves seemed to grow in number. He believed he needed more strength. He needed even greater power. He snapped out of his thoughts when he heard shouting nearby. Moving toward the sound, he reached a corner and saw a male warrior fighting against wolves. The wolves growled as the warrior held his sword out toward them. It was the first time the Minotaur had seen someone else engaged in battle. He watched as the wolves charged at the warrior. The warrior blocked one wolf with his shield and deflected another with his sword. Despite his efforts, the constant attacks overwhelmed him, and he was injured. The Minotaur continued watching as the warrior struggled to hold off all of them. Suddenly, the warrior lost his grip on his shield. In that instant, a wolf bit into his arm. Pain crossed his face as he thrust his sword forward, killing the wolf. He then stood facing the last wolf, his arm bleeding, his sword pointed toward it. As if timed together, the wolf lunged forward. The warrior swung his sword, but the wolf quickly dodged to the side. The Minotaur's eyes widened as he focused on the warrior's face. The male warrior grabbed his dagger and slashed across the remaining wolf's face. The wolf staggered and fell to the ground, its eyes badly injured. Without wasting a moment, the male warrior drove his blade into the wolf's neck, ending its life. Items and coins scattered across the floor. He quickly picked up a potion, pulled it open, and drank it in one motion. For adventurers exploring the labyrinth, healing potions were the most valuable support they could carry. Each color carried a different effect. Red potions restored the body and healed wounds. They could even regenerate lost limbs, restoring what had been severed. The male warrior let out a slow breath as his body began to recover. The pain eased. His strength returned. As he glanced to his side, he noticed a figure lurking in the shadows. A Minotaur. His eyes widened. Confusion and disbelief ran through his thoughts. A Minotaur? Why was such a creature here? Why was a boss monster outside its designated chamber? The Minotaur stared at him. It tightened its grip on its axe and stepped out from the corner, fully revealing itself. The male warrior forced himself to stand, though his body trembled. At his current level, this was not an enemy he could defeat alone. He looked behind him and spotted the exit leading to the 10th floor. Slowly, carefully, he began stepping backward. The Minotaur watched as the male warrior slipped around the corner. It followed and reached the spot, only to find a staircase leading upward. Before it could decide what to do next, pain pulsed through its body. Its wounds throbbed heavily. The Minotaur felt curiosity about what lay beyond, about the place where the swordsman had gone. Yet its injured body demanded rest. With that, the Minotaur turned back. Its heavy footsteps echoed across the floor as it walked away. Several days later, in the suburbs of the Sazeradan Labyrinth, within the village of Mycenae, the streets were lively. Citizens moved about with purpose, tending to their tasks. Inside the Adventurers Guild, voices filled the air. Adventurers talked among themselves, prepared for missions, and drank freely. A crowd gathered around the quest board, scanning the posted requests. Among them, a man expressed clear dissatisfaction at what he saw. His name was Paja, a level 28, Class C adventurer. Another voice called out to him. He turned and saw the guild president approaching. The guild president informed him that he had arrived at the right time and presented a request for him to take. After reading the request, Paja reacted to the words written on it, noting that it was an investigation about a cow's head. The guild president explained that a report had come in from an adventurer who claimed to have encountered a minotaur in the corridors of the 10th floor. Paja responded with disbelief at the idea of a minotaur appearing outside the boss room. He assumed the adventurer had likely been frightened and mistaken another creature for it. The guild president admitted that he had initially thought the same. However, additional details had surfaced. Equipment and a medal belonging to a D-class adventurer named Alina had been recovered in front of the boss room. The equipment had been torn apart, marked clearly by the large claw strikes of a minotaur. Furthermore, there were reports that potions and coins had been left scattered across the 10th floor. A rumor had begun to spread about a strange creature roaming the area, hunting gray wolf monsters and leaving item drops behind. Paja considered this carefully. He reflected that although he had occasionally heard of adventurers exhausting themselves after defeating a boss and collapsing outside the room, he had never heard of anyone deliberately choosing gray wolves as opponents afterward, especially since they were known to be more of a nuisance than a challenge. On top of that, abandoning item drops was undeniably unusual. The guild president clarified that while they were calling it an investigation, it was essentially a mandatory verification. They needed Paja to confirm whether the minotaur remained in the boss room and to determine if anything abnormal was taking place. For someone as capable as him, it should be a simple task. He added that the monetary reward might not be impressive, but asked whether Paja would accept it. He also mentioned the possibility of owing Paja a favor himself. Paja smiled at the thought. Being owed a favor by the guild president of the world was not a bad reward on its own. At that moment, another voice interrupted, expressing interest in joining the task as well. Paja reacted in surprise. The guild president turned and saw two additional adventurers standing there. One of them was a female adventurer named Charlia, a level 28 Class C adventurer. The other was Raystrand, a level 29 Class C adventurer. As soon as Charlia and Raystrand approached Paja, he reacted by telling Charlia to stop joking. Dividing such a small reward among all of them would only result in a loss. Charlia responded that the reward could remain entirely his. In exchange for their assistance, she asked that he handle the report himself. They were content with simply hunting and having the guild president owe them a favor as well. Raystrand then looked to the guild president for confirmation. The guild president replied that if Paja had no objections, they were free to proceed as they wished. Both of them were close to being promoted to B-class, so there was no issue regarding their qualifications. Charlia let out a light laugh and declared that the matter was settled. She stated with confidence that she, who would one day surpass the great magic user Gil Lynx himself, the pulchritudinous Charlia, had no reason to refuse offering assistance. Paja reacted with visible annoyance. He remarked that there were many reasons, starting with the burden of protecting someone conceited enough to refer to herself by two names. He stopped abruptly when Charlia struck her staff sharply against her palm. She fixed him with a heavy gaze and pressed him on whether there were truly any reasons. Paja faltered and quickly agreed. Charlia turned away and stated calmly that in that case, they would depart. Paja then asked Raystrand why he, being a reasonable person, chose to associate with someone like her. Raystrand laughed and replied that Charlia could be quite charming once one became accustomed to her. Charlia then addressed the guild president again, asking what they should do if something unusual was indeed occurring. She brought up the possibility that, for some reason, the minotaur might actually be wandering outside the boss room. The guild president answered that in such an unlikely event, the response would be left to their judgment. Depending on the situation, their payment would be increased. The reward for subjugation would apply if necessary. A pursuit party was thus formed, set on tracking the bloodstained beast. A fierce battle awaited them. Several hours later, Paja and the others arrived at the Sazerdan Labyrinth, standing before the boss room on the 10th floor. Char, Ray, and Paja stepped inside together. The moment Paja caught sight of the figure ahead, a grin spread across his face as he pointed it out. The minotaur stood before them and slowly turned its head toward the three adventurers. Paja remarked that it was only natural. There was no way the floor's boss would be wandering outside the boss room. Still, he noted something odd. Was a cow head supposed to have that much hair? Ray observed that it was unusually large as well, bigger than any minotaur he had encountered so far. Char agreed that something about it felt strange. It did not seem threatened or frightened as it looked at them. All three of them were strong enough to hunt a minotaur alone. Yet this one stared back at them with a self-important air, calmly sizing them up. Char decided she would hunt it down just in case. She did not like its eyes at all. Ray suggested it was probably a unique monster. If that was the case, the chances of it dropping rare items were higher than usual. Paja asked whether it was only natural that all the rewards would be his share, including any bonuses. Char responded that he was as greedy as ever, and if that was the case, then all the expenses for expendable items would also fall on him. Ray told Paja that if, by some grace, a bastard sword happened to drop, it should be left for him. Paja scoffed, saying that even for a unique type, that would be difficult. He mentioned hearing about someone with strange tastes who had hunted 50 of them and still failed to get one. Ray corrected him, saying it had been him, and more accurately, 49. Paja reacted in disbelief. Char cut them off and told them to stop talking. They needed to hurry and form up. It was time to hunt. The adventurers took their stances. Char instructed Paja that she and Ray would draw the Minotaur's attention while he used the opportunity to fire Icaros. Once the poison paralyzed it, she would finish it with her fireball of death. Paja complained that he was already handling the expenses, and now they were suddenly telling him to use his expensive arrows. Char snapped at him to be quiet. She wanted this fight with such a small opponent over as quickly as possible. Paja let out a sigh. Though he also wanted to end it quickly, he could not ignore what he felt. From the moment he laid eyes on that cow-headed creature, something about it had seemed off. A faint but unmistakable ominous energy surrounded the Minotaur. The Minotaur watched closely as Paja reached to his side and activated his sack. Its eyes widened when a faint glow surrounded Paja's hand. The sack was one of the abilities granted to adventurers who had received grace jobs, an invisible storage space that allowed them to draw out items at will. As the Minotaur observed Paja pulling arrows from his magical inventory, Char began casting her spell. She invoked ropes of pebble and thorns of clay, calling upon the goddess's honorable arm to punish the fool who trampled and bind them. Earthbind took form. Vines suddenly burst from the ground and coiled around the Minotaur's legs. At the same moment, Ray rushed forward and swung his sword across the Minotaur's back. The strike connected, but the blade failed to cut through the Minotaur's tough hide. Ray realized his sword could not pierce it. This Minotaur was clearly different from the usual kind. The creature let out a growl of anger as Ray pressed on, attempting to land multiple blows. Char immediately cast another spell. She called upon thin ice to become her blade and cut through her target. Sharp ice projectiles formed before her. With a forceful release, the ice knives shot toward the Minotaur. It noticed the attack and quickly raised its axe, blocking the incoming shards. Without delay, Char summoned 4 more ice knives and launched them as well. Paja observed that although the spell consumed less mental power and was suitable for repeated use, producing 5 at once was no simple feat. There was a reason she carried the name Pulchritudinous Charlia. As the ice knives flew through the air, Char judged that it was indeed a unique Minotaur, but still lacking in wit. With this, victory should have been theirs. As the ice knives closed in, Paja moved swiftly to the Minotaur's blind side. He activated his Icaros arrows, crafted through temple rituals and imbued with a powerful paralytic poison along with a blessing that made them difficult to miss. Drawing his bow, he took aim. The Minotaur was focused on the ice knives. It was the perfect blind spot. He released the arrow with confidence. His eyes widened in disbelief as the Minotaur managed to block the Icaros arrow as well. The movement allowed the ice knives to strike their target. The Minotaur roared in pain and, in the same motion, swung its axe at Ray, the force of the blow sending Ray backward. Char reacted in disbelief, unable to understand what had just happened. It had been the perfect opportunity, yet the shot had failed. Paja stood stunned, his thoughts racing. The Minotaur had blocked it. That had been a flawless blind spot. On top of that, the creature had ignored the ice knives even as they approached directly within its sight. There was no way it could have been fully aware of his arrow and still reacted in time. The possibility unsettled him. Had it instinctively sensed the danger? He quickly rejected the idea, convincing himself it was foolish. It must have been nothing more than coincidence. Their thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the Minotaur releasing a deep, heavy breath. The 3 adventurers steadied themselves as they saw it adjust its grip, readying its axe while fixing a focused stare on them. Ray observed that the Minotaur seemed to be taking a stance. Char felt a growing confusion at the sight. Something about this was wrong. She called to Paja and asked whether he could fire another Icaros. Paja answered that he had already used them all. Char decided it did not matter. They would shift strategies and follow a more calculated approach. They would corner the Minotaur from 3 sides, disable its weapon, and then deliver the finishing strike. She reminded them to take this seriously. At this rate, she could already imagine being mocked for daring to think she could surpass the great master Gil Lynx. The thought of her father saying such words weighed on her. Once again, the 3 adventurers prepared themselves to face the Minotaur. As they waited for the creature to move, Char's mind drifted to the day she first received her staff. Her father had handed it to her, telling her it was the holy wand he had once received from his own master, Gil Lynx. It was not a perfect substitute, but it served as a farewell gift. He had entrusted Raystrand with watching over her and had made it clear that if his foolish daughter tried to run away, he would not object to stopping her by force. Char had declared that even if she was not worthy at that moment, she would prove herself in time. She would use the wand as it was meant to be used, surpass Gil Lynx, and become the greatest magic user in the world. When her father gave no response, she had insisted that she would earn his approval and make him acknowledge her talent. The memory faded as the present returned. The three adventurers launched their attacks at once. Char released her ice knives. Paja fired his arrows. Ray charged forward with his sword. Yet the Minotaur blocked every strike. Char sent another volley of ice knives toward it, but again, the Minotaur deflected them with precise efficiency. She realized with growing alarm that every blade aimed at a vital point was being stopped. The adventurers were beginning to lose patience. A Minotaur was known as a powerful boss monster of the lower levels, but this beast had proven itself to be something far more formidable. It was a demon beast with overwhelming strength and durability, an opponent that required at least 3 individuals above Class C working together to subdue. At this point it could barely be touched. Although the combined attacks of the 3 had inflicted visible wounds, once the Minotaur adjusted its stance, it guarded the center of its body carefully, leaving no vital points exposed. Even while restrained by earthbind and bleeding from numerous injuries, its movements showed no sign of slowing. Meanwhile, the adventurers struggled to maintain their stamina. They had been consuming red potions to restore physical strength and blue potions to recover mental energy, taking them whenever they found brief openings. However, their supplies were limited. No matter how many potions they swallowed, their focus could not be restored. Mental exhaustion continued to build with every passing moment. Paja's eyes widened as yet another arrow failed to land effectively. Char began casting a new spell. She invoked a snake of light, calling for roots to coil and flames to consume, commanding darkness to be devoured and turned into fuel. She continued the incantation, urging the fire to burn and fan itself higher, invoking the weight of sins and offenses, summoning the wrath of red bronze and the sorrow of gray-blue. Paja reacted sharply, warning her to stop. A spell with such a long chant would leave her defenseless. Char refused to back down. Someone destined to become the greatest magic user in the world could not afford to struggle against an opponent like this. Ray also called out, realizing it would not succeed. In that instant of distraction, the Minotaur seized the opportunity. It lifted its axe and hurled it directly toward Char. Paja could only cry out her name as the weapon flew. Char's eyes snapped open when she heard the heavy sound of the axe cutting through flesh, followed by the sensation of blood spraying outward. When her vision cleared, she saw that Ray had just managed to block the axe. His shattered helmet lay on the ground beside him. Ray reminded her that staying calm was the most important thing for a magic user. He had been taught that thoroughly by her father. Char looked up at him and saw the deep gash across his head, blood flowing down his face in steady streams. Ray urged her to take slow, steady breaths. Char broke into tears and apologized. Nearby, Paja shouted for both of them as the Minotaur drew in a long breath. He warned that a frenzy was coming and ordered them to put a yellow potion in their mouths. The Minotaur completed its breath and released a thunderous roar. Paja was struck by the frenzy, but the effect was neutralized when he swallowed the yellow potion. Yellow potions instantly removed abnormal conditions. As Paja recovered, he called out to Ray and Char, asking if they could still move. Both confirmed that they could. Paja declared that he would fire one more Icaros. This would be the finishing blow, and he hoped it would succeed. Char realized that Paja still had one left. Paja reasoned to himself that there should be an opening after the Minotaur used frenzy. It would leave a huge deficit. They had no other choice. This was their limit. It would end with this attack. Then, without warning, the Minotaur drew in breath once more. None of the 3 adventurers could believe it. Before they could react, the Minotaur unleashed frenzy again. The attack paralyzed them, and all 3 collapsed to the ground. Paja struggled to understand what was happening. The Minotaur was using frenzy continuously. That was impossible. It had always been said that the cow-headed beast could only use it once per fight. The Minotaur ripped through Char's earthbind and began walking toward Paja. The adventurers had never imagined this outcome. To them, this was something that simply could not happen. For a demon beast within the labyrinth to level up, to strengthen its skills, and even gain entirely new powers, these were the reasons the battle had become such a desperate struggle for the adventurers. A labyrinth demon beast was never supposed to evolve or grow. Yet it possessed a dangerous ability to learn. The Minotaur swung its blade and severed Paja's head. His body burst into light, leaving behind only scattered items and money. Char could not accept what she had just seen. Ray rose to his feet and told her to step back. He would handle the Minotaur. Char tried to protest in her mind. Even if Ray could move, the effects of the howling would still remain. Her thoughts were interrupted as Ray reminded her that he had said this before. He had been entrusted by her father to protect her. It was a decision he had made himself. As long as Charlia stood behind him, he would not lose. The Minotaur charged, its axe cutting through the air. Ray prepared to counter. He realized there was only one axe left. If he could evade this single strike, the beast would be left open. That would be their chance to win. As the axe came down toward his head, Ray shifted his foot and ducked, feeling a brief surge of relief as he avoided the blow. In the next instant he saw the Minotaur's fist. Before he could react, it struck his face. Ray was stunned. A Minotaur had used a feint. That was unthinkable. The Minotaur, drawing on its past battles, moved with calculated intent and cut off Ray's hand. Pain tore through him. He realized then that this Minotaur was not ordinary, even among the unique ones. It was abnormal. Char called out to Ray, but in a weakened state he urged her to run. He wanted her to escape and live a long life. She could only watch as the Minotaur struck him down, cleaving his body in half. His form dissolved into light, his armor falling to the ground. Her eyes widened, unable to process what had happened. She remembered Ray's promise that he would always protect her, until she became the greatest magic user. Tears fell as the Minotaur stepped closer. Char cried out, then forced herself to stand. She began casting her spell. Snake of light. Roll up thine roost, and burn up thine self. Rabbit of ebony. Be devoured by the light and become sustenance. Burn, burn, fan the flames. 9 original sins. 5 offenses. Burn, burn, fan the flames. Wrath of red bronze. Sorrow of gray blue. Snake of crimson. Roll up thine roost and turn around. Rage filled her thoughts. The Minotaur had killed Ray. She would reduce it to charcoal and burn it to nothing. She began the final chant of her spell. Reverse winding. Thin binding. Return to ashes. Before she could complete it, the Minotaur's axe flew forward and struck her down. Her spell vanished instantly. The Minotaur let out a victorious roar, standing amid the scattered items left behind by the fallen adventurers. Outside the labyrinth, the sun was setting. In the outskirts of the Sazerdan labyrinth, within the village of Mycenae, the Adventurers Guild stood quietly. Inside the guild president's office, the guild president reflected in silence. It had already been half a day since Paja and the others departed. For a simple confirmation mission, their return was far too late. He began to wonder if something unusual had occurred within the labyrinth. His thoughts were interrupted when a man addressed him, asking if something was troubling him. Logan. The guild president apologized for appearing worried in front of a guest. The man remarked that there always seemed to be something troublesome whenever the Lord met with him. He added that the president's position must come with its own hardships. As usual, he suggested that the president should speak about what had happened. He directed this to the elderly man present, Gil Lynx. Meanwhile, deep within the labyrinth, a demon beast that had already defeated powerful opponents continued to grow. Its abnormal strength began to draw the attention of even the strongest magic user in the world. Quick pause. If you're enjoying this, help us reach 1,000 subscribers. 1 click equals instant power-up. Subscribe now. Back to the story. Inside the Adventurers Guild, after the guild president finished explaining the situation, Gil Lynx responded that he understood. The adventurers who had been sent to investigate had not returned at all. In the guild president's room, the president remained silent as Gil Lynx remarked that it was a Minotaur. Gil Lynx was a level 97, Class S adventurer. After a brief moment of thought, he stated that he understood and would check on the situation himself. The guild president attempted to object, adding that for someone like him, a great magic user, to handle such a task personally was unnecessary. However, Gil Lynx had already teleported away. The guild president let out a sigh and commented that he was as carefree as ever. A few moments later, Gil Lynx reappeared in the office. The guild president asked about the outcome. Gil Lynx removed his helmet and placed several items on the table. He stated that the medals and belongings of 3 adventurers had been left in the boss room on the 10th floor. The Minotaur had not been there. He then asked whether one of them was Charlia, possibly the relative of Azel. The guild president confirmed that she was indeed his daughter. Gil Lynx paused briefly before acknowledging the information. The guild president thought to himself that 3 adventurers above C class should have been capable of fighting on the 10th floor. At the very least, they should have been able to defeat the 10th floor boss. He wondered if they could have died. Gil Lynx then informed the guild president that he would pay a visit to the royal palace and would return after handling certain matters. He advised Logan to tread carefully regarding this issue. As Gil Lynx disappeared once more, the guild president remained alone in his office. He reflected on the fact that the Minotaur had not been there. He considered what it could mean. Had it ended in a draw between the Minotaur and the 3 adventurers, with both sides dying? Or was there another possibility? Back in the Sazerdan labyrinth, the Minotaur's heavy footsteps echoed through the halls of the 10th floor. He stopped before the staircase that led up to the 9th floor. The Minotaurus who had slain the 3 adventurers and gained further levels stood in thought. He considered whether he would simply wait from that point on. For new victories, stronger opponents would need to appear. The Minotaur wandered through the labyrinth, searching for worthy enemies. He roared as he sought further conflict. The next morning, a report from a witness regarding the Minotaur was delivered to the guild president, Logan. The guild president reacted with disbelief at the mention of the 9th floor. The 10th floor boss, the Minotaurus, had reportedly been seen on the 9th floor. The witnesses were 5 individuals who had only become adventurers that year. They reported that the Minotaur had not even glanced at them in their frightened state before leaving. Although the account sounded absurd, the 5 adventurers' statements matched perfectly, and there were no signs of deception. The guild president then instructed the guild manager to issue an alert to all adventurers for the time being. The guild manager acknowledged the order. The guild president let out a sigh and wondered what would come of the situation. Normally, moving up or down the hierarchy required the use of the stairs. Only adventurers who had been bestowed with grace were able to use them. Monsters could not even recognize the stairs, much less use them. Yet there were reports claiming it had been seen on the 9th floor. He sighed again and remarked that at this rate, it was practically a monster adventurer. This was the first time something like this had happened. He then asked the guild manager for his thoughts on the matter. The adventurer's guild manager, Yadur, responded that at the moment, he did not have much to conclude. He suggested it might be a spontaneous abnormality. He also considered whether it could be an artificial abnormality caused by someone. The guild president repeated the word artificial and acknowledged that it was not impossible for someone to manipulate a powerful controlling spell. Yadur replied that it was too early to determine that. However, regardless of the cause, the situation might resolve itself soon. The guild president asked why. Yadur paused before reminding him that someone was currently diving in the labyrinth. The heavenly sword, Lord Percival. Back in the Sazerdan labyrinth, Percival was engaged in battle with a large stone golem. The golem clenched its fist and drove it toward him, but each strike was avoided. The golem then raised its foot to crush him, yet instead of evading, Percival lifted his shield and stopped the descending foot. He remained beneath the shield for a brief moment before activating it, triggering a loud explosion. The golem's foot shattered, causing its body to sag before collapsing onto the floor. Debris scattered into the air, and Percival leaped across the flying fragments, using them to propel himself toward the golem's face, where a single stone served as its core. Breaking that stone would end it. The stone golem attempted to seize him, but Percival spun through the air and drove straight through its hand, breaking past it and closing in on the core. His sword struck the stone embedded in the golem's face, shattering it into countless fragments. The golem's hands crumbled, and its body dissolved into light. For top S-class adventurers, the suitable floor for solo exploration was said to be the 50th floor. The heavenly sword, Percival, had currently reached the 96th floor. After the battle, Percival calmly sheathed his sword. More than 10 hours later, on the 14th floor, Percival was on his way back after finishing a battle in the deeper layers. He sat alone while eating his meal. Percival Merculius, the head of the Merculius house from a direct aristocratic line, rarely attended court councils and spent most of the year traveling alone to different places throughout the labyrinth. He was known as an eccentric swordsman. At only 12 years old, Percival became an adventurer, and by 14 he had already reached a class. At 15, after subjugating the Zoahard bandits and demonstrating overwhelming martial skill, he became the youngest S-class in history. He came to be called the Heavenly Sword. The name came from the words of his childhood swordmaster, who once praised him by saying that the boy's talent with the sword was unmatched, a gift from heaven. During his quiet meal, Percival reflected on the recent exploration. The journey had been meaningful. This time he had reached the 96th floor, and during those battles he had grown more familiar with using Endi's shield when fighting giant enemies. 5 treasures had been passed down through generations within the Merculius house. The first was Endi's shield, which could deflect physical attacks and reduce recoil. Next was Alestra's bracelet, which allowed arbitrary dissipation of magic. The third was Rika's ring, which enabled the invocation of attack magic. The fourth was Kalden's dagger, capable of terminating abnormal conditions, rendering poison ineffective while granting sacred attributes. The final treasure was Bolton's amulet, which granted invisibility, magic absorption, and accumulation. All of these relics were considered the highest grade of rare items. Even so, no one had yet managed to wield them perfectly. Percival held the quiet certainty that he would eventually master them. Within his thoughts, the lowest layer of the labyrinth stood as the place where he would be able to use every one of them at their full power. His path would reach the 100th floor. There, he would face the labyrinth's main beast, the metal dragon. Percival intended to subjugate it alone. No one else would interfere. The battle would belong only to him, fought freely and to the very end against powerful enemies that had been sharpened through countless battles. The taciturn swordsman's expression remained unchanged. Yet while thinking about that distant goal, a quiet heat slowly rose within him. Back at the Adventurers Guild, inside the guild president's office, Yadur judged the situation by observing the amount of food being delivered. From that, he concluded that Master Percival would most likely return to the surface within a few days. Logan considered the matter and thought about requesting a subjugation from the Heavenly Sword once Percival returned. It would certainly be a quick solution. Percival was known as someone who pursued the truth in battle. Even though the cow-headed beast had killed the top 3 members of the C-class, such an opponent would be nothing more than small fry for him. Even so, Logan understood that Percival was not the kind of person who would accept a request for subjugation so easily. Yadur continued his reasoning. If attacked, the creature would naturally fight back. Creatures like the Grey Wolves, beasts that roamed each floor of the labyrinth, normally did not rush to attack opponents who were overwhelmingly superior. However, the bosses of each floor behaved differently. Any intruder who entered the boss room would be attacked without hesitation, no matter how great the difference in rank. Still, if such a creature were to wander outside the boss room without its nature changing, the situation would be different. Logan paused as the thought settled in his mind. The possibility formed that the Minotaur might attack the Heavenly Sword while Percival was simply making his way back to the surface. The idea seemed unexpectedly convenient. Yadur considered that possibility and did not dismiss it. The closer one moved toward the surface floors of the labyrinth, the smaller the areas became. In the single-digit floors, encounters with other adventurers could even be more common than encounters with demon beasts. Under those conditions, the chance that Master Percival would cross paths with the Minotaur in question could be considered quite high. Meanwhile, deep within the Sazerdan labyrinth, Percival's blade cut across the Minotaur's chest. The creature failed to react in time, and blood burst from the wound. Percival watched as the Minotaur staggered back several steps. His eyes widened slightly as he moved aside, narrowly avoiding the swing of the Minotaur's axe. A few hours after taking a short rest, Percival arrived at the 6th floor. He quietly observed as blood from the Minotaur's chest dripped onto the stone floor. In his mind, Percival reviewed the strike he had delivered earlier. The attack had been aimed to cut through the Minotaur's heart, yet the blade had only passed through flesh. The thought crossed his mind that he might have misjudged the depth of the strike. He considered the possibility, but the idea did not fully settle in his mind. His attention shifted as the Minotaur moved. The creature reached to its side, and a sack appeared in its grasp. Percival's eyes widened slightly as the Minotaur slowly pulled out Ray's sword. From its earlier fight with the 3 adventurers, the Minotaur had learned how to use the sack. From within it, the creature retrieved the large sword it had taken as loot from the previous battle. Percival calmly examined the situation in his thoughts. The creature was clearly unique. It had appeared abnormally on the 6th floor rather than on the floor where it originally belonged. It had attacked him despite the difference in rank. It was also capable of operating the sack, an item that normally could not be used by anyone except adventurers who had received it through grace. Above all, the creature had managed to avoid his flash strike by the narrowest margin. To Percival, the labyrinth continued to reveal its interesting nature. The Minotaur let out a low growl toward him. Percival quietly recognized that the battle ahead might offer a small amount of enjoyment. Beneath the ground, the demon beast and the Heavenly Sword stood facing one another, and a bloody encounter was about to unfold. Huge magic circles spread across the sky above the arena, and the audience stared upward in stunned amazement. The witch wore a quiet grin while Percival prepared himself for what was about to unfold. In the center of the Colosseum, Percival and the witch faced each other directly. One side stood as a devil that dared to challenge the heavens, while the other stood as the sword that could tear through the ground. Percival later recounts the story of that battle. Among the opponents that remained particularly memorable to him was the magic user who fought during the Imperial Inspection Martial Arts Tournament 8 years earlier. That opponent had used a spell known as the Saman Comet. Several days before Percival entered the labyrinth, he visited the guild president's room. The guild president remembered the incident clearly. Someone remarkable had appeared in that tournament. The Saman Comet was known as an extremely powerful spell, yet it required time to prepare and cast, and it consumed a vast amount of magic power. Even declaring the intention to use such magic in a one-on-one martial arts tournament was already unusual. For an opponent to actually unleash it against Master Percival made the situation even more extraordinary. Still, the most remarkable part was what happened afterward. The guild president recalled the martial arts tournament from 8 years earlier. The Saman Comet had been cast, and blazing fragments rained down across the stadium. Each comet that struck the ground shook the surroundings. Despite the destruction falling from above, Percival moved through the chaos with ease, avoiding every comet and every piece of debris. The guild president added that, amid a sky filled with falling stars, Percival emerged almost completely unharmed. Percival then explained the reason. The opponent had never intended to strike him directly. Realizing this later, Percival understood that the true target had been the ground surrounding him. If he had recognized that intention sooner, he would have been able to respond to it more effectively. The spell had been chanted quickly, not for a single decisive strike, but to create turbulence and a relentless barrage. By making full use of such unusual tactics, the true aim behind the attack remained unclear to Percival. The strategy was striking. For a brief moment during that exchange, Percival found himself unable to either attack or defend. His movements slowed. The audience could not understand how the heavenly sword had been forced into such a position. Faced with the unbelievable scene unfolding before them, the spectators held their breath and continued to watch, waiting to see what would happen next. Percival later remembered that moment. As he moved through the falling comets, the witch wore a grin while tightening her grip on her staff. Her eyes shone with focus. Just as she was about to cast another spell, a loud bell rang across the arena. Both the witch and Percival stopped in surprise. Their attention turned toward the judge as the match was halted. According to the tournament regulations, Article 5, Section 1, attacks meant to kill or that carried the potential to kill fighters were forbidden. The magic being used was judged to violate that rule. Because of the foul committed during the fight, the victory was awarded to Percival Merculius. After finishing the story, Percival regarded the outcome as a completely inelegant decision. From the guild president's perspective, an ordinary person might have died in such a situation. However, the opponent had been the heavenly sword. In truth, even at that point, Percival had not suffered any injury. It could have been remembered as a moment worthy of praise. The situation had demonstrated the opponent's high level of skill and sharp intuition, securing enough time to cast magic and gain an advantage against Master Percival, who specialized in high-speed combat. The guild president also considered how the outcome might have been different if the match had not been interrupted so suddenly. No one present could have predicted what would have happened next. The possibility that an extraordinary battle might have unfolded remained, even now, something that still felt like a loss. Percival expressed his agreement with that thought. At that moment in the past, he had only just encountered what he considered a magnificent adversary. The guild president reflected quietly on what he had learned afterward. Curiosity had led him to investigate the matter at the time. The referee who stopped the match had likely intended to gain favor with the Merculius family, a direct aristocratic house, through that judgment. Although such behavior was foolish, it was not particularly rare. From that understanding, the guild president connected the situation to Percival's current actions and concluded that it explained the decision to enter the labyrinth. Percival closed his eyes and calmly took a sip of his tea. His attention shifted briefly to the drink, noting that the tea served there was good. The guild president explained that the tea poured for him was Iodor. For him, it was a notable matter that such inexpensive tea leaves were able to satisfy the refined taste of the head of the Merculius house. The offer was made that Percival could have it again when he returned from the labyrinth. Percival looked at the guild president with a blank expression before giving a simple acknowledgement. Their conversation continued throughout the night. Later, within the Sazerdan labyrinth, the battle continued. Percival pressed forward with a rapid flurry of attacks against the Minotaur. The Minotaur met the assault without difficulty, blocking each strike with ease. Right after Percival attacked the Minotaur, he judged the creature to be stubborn. Its muscles were stronger than those of normal individuals, and restrained attacks would not break through them. It handled its weapons faster than he expected and continued blocking every strike aimed at its vital points. Those eyes remained fixed and sharp. If Percival reached into the sack and pulled out some rare item, he could escape this locked situation immediately. Yet he was certain those eyes would not miss even the slightest suspicious movement. The Minotaur kept its focus on Percival and suddenly slashed its sword toward him. Percival quickly dodged. In his mind, he narrowed his options. The only things he could rely on were the single longsword in his hand and a refined slashing technique. Percival swung his sword and unleashed a rapid flurry of attacks. The Minotaur stepped back quickly while blocking with its sword and axe. Even so, the speed and pressure of Percival's strikes overwhelmed it, and the Minotaur's sword was knocked out of its hand. Percival prepared for another attack and rushed forward. The Minotaur could not move quickly enough to respond, but at that moment Percival's body wobbled. The Minotaur noticed the brief instability. Percival showed a faint scoff before launching a quick strike and stepping back. The Minotaur roared and immediately retaliated. It raised its axe and smashed the floor, sending shattered debris flying toward Percival. Percival reacted quickly, deflecting the incoming debris with his sword. One piece after another was struck aside. However, one fragment hit his other hand. The potion he had been holding slipped from his grasp, fell to the ground, and rolled away. The moment the Minotaur saw the item that had fallen from Percival's hand, an instinctive understanding formed. It realized that the man in front of it was tired. Percival's body had already begun to protest. After running up nearly 40 floors for training and enduring a long, relentless battle with a Minotaur, exhaustion was setting in. The Minotaur did not understand the effects of potions, yet it did not miss the opening created by Percival's fatigue. It quickly sent another wave of shattered debris flying toward him. Percival deflected the debris with ease, knocking each piece aside with his sword. However, his eyes widened when the Minotaur suddenly charged forward. The beast launched several attacks in quick succession, but Percival avoided them one after another. In his thoughts, he realized there was no chance to heal. He wondered if his fatigue had somehow drawn the Minotaur's attention. The Minotaur roared again. At that moment, Percival recognized the situation as an opportunity. If the creature continued attacking without pause, its defenses would inevitably weaken. The Minotaur lifted its hand, and Percival noticed a brief opening. As the Minotaur planted its foot forward, Percival moved in and slashed across its neck, leaving a small cut. The battle continued with both sides attacking at the same time. The Minotaur's strikes failed to reach Percival, yet Percival's own attacks only left shallow marks on the Minotaur's body. In his thoughts, he realized the cuts were too shallow. His slashes were not reaching any vital points. The labyrinth trembled as the Minotaur roared once more. Percival firmly planted his feet on the ground while the Minotaur began another charge. Yet the creature noticed his movement. Percival remained ready and waited, his eyes fixed ahead. The Minotaur's heavy footsteps echoed as it rushed closer, but it suddenly stopped just before reaching him. Percival carefully observed the creature. It seemed surprised. The situation did not feel natural. This demon beast was calculating its timing. By combining the reach of its arms with the length of its weapons, it could strike more effectively. Its attacks could reach him, yet Percival's own strikes could not reach the Minotaur in the same way. At the final moment, the creature always remained vigilant. No matter how many times Percival chopped at it, he could not reach its fatal points. The timing was too precise. On top of that, the Minotaur appeared to be testing the limits of the battle itself. It had turned the fight into a contest of endurance. Percival's limits against the Minotaur's limits. The question remained which one would exhaust first. Percival resolved to pour everything he had into the fight. As the Minotaur breathed heavily, Percival recalled the words once spoken by the guild president about the labyrinth. The thought stirred something within him. A spark of determination ignited inside Percival as he faced the Minotaur. The Minotaur roared again and swung its axe, unleashing another fierce flurry of attacks. No words were needed between the two rivals. The clash of blades had become their clearest form of communication. In the middle of the battle between the Minotaur and Percival, their eyes remained locked as they exchanged attacks. The air around them filled with the sharp swings of their weapons, while the torches lighting the dungeon seemed to glow brighter against the stone walls. It became a fierce exchange of offense and defense, leaving no moment for either of them to catch their breath. The clash continued for a long time without pause. After some time, the Minotaur roared again, but Percival remained unfazed. He swiftly dodged the Minotaur's attack and immediately countered. Another strike from the Minotaur followed, and Percival narrowly avoided it once more before responding with a quick counterattack. The Minotaur felt a rising frustration within himself. What had stained the swordsman standing before him was not the man's own blood, but the Minotaur's blood that had splattered across him during the fight. The Minotaur clenched his teeth. Even after fighting in this space for such a long time, he had not managed to land a single hit on the small human in front of him. Driven by frustration, he threw a quick punch, but Percival noticed the movement immediately and dodged. At the same time, Percival struck the Minotaur's arms several times. Percival understood the situation clearly. The attack had been careless, driven by the Minotaur's frustration. It was not the kind of opening that the heavenly sword would fail to notice. The Minotaur watched as Percival swung his sword again. For a brief instant, Percival's movement became slightly loose. His fatigue had finally reached its limit. The Minotaur's eyes widened at the opening, and he delivered a powerful punch that struck Percival. The blow knocked the breath from Percival's body and sent him flying backward. While Percival was still in the air, the Minotaur swung his axe and severed Percival's foot. The Minotaur took a breath as he watched Percival skid across the stone floor. Without hesitation, he rushed toward him and raised his axe to finish the fight. But before the strike could fall, Percival slashed at one of the Minotaur's legs. The sudden attack threw the Minotaur off balance. Percival spun his body and immediately rushed forward, swinging his sword again. The Minotaur barely managed to dodge the attack in time. Before he could recover, Percival followed with another strike, hitting the Minotaur's chest and then his head. The next attack landed squarely on the Minotaur's head. The creature braced one hand against the floor, yet the strength behind Percival's blows still sent the Minotaur crashing into the wall. The Minotaur's heart pounded loudly as he struggled to catch his breath. At the same time, Percival lay motionless on the floor. The Minotaur's heart beat even harder. A shudder passed through him as a thought formed in his mind. The man before him was remarkable. It was the first feeling the Minotaur had ever held of that kind. The Minotaur watched as blood poured from Percival's severed leg. Percival remained still and silent on the ground. Then Percival slowly lifted his sword toward his chest. The Minotaur's eyes widened when he saw Percival close his eyes. The Minotaur began stepping slowly toward him, each footstep heavy against the stone floor. As it approached, the Minotaur noticed Percival's breathing. Its eyes widened, and it suddenly rushed forward. The moment the Minotaur drew close, the sword resting on Percival's chest suddenly moved. The blade swung in a sharp arc and sliced across the Minotaur's leg. Blood burst from the wound. The Minotaur clenched its teeth from the pain and leaped backward. With wide eyes and heavy breaths, it carefully observed Percival. In the silence between them, something became clear. A shining arc of light surrounded Percival. It formed an invisible boundary that cut through anything that stepped within it. This was Percival's blade sphere of certain death. The Minotaur paused and thought. Getting close was impossible. If that was the case, another method would be needed. As Percival lay wounded on the ground, the Minotaur considered the situation. The man in front of him was likely to die soon. Waiting would be enough. There was no need to risk approaching. The Minotaur was also nearing his own limit. Taking further risks would serve no purpose. He thought again. If he simply waited and did nothing, victory would belong to him. The Minotaur clenched his teeth and suddenly punched his own face. His head snapped back from the impact before he steadied himself again. A harsh thought passed through his mind. That idea had been foolish. Blood dripped from his mouth as he spat it out. What he truly sought was not victory. What he desired was battle. A battle to the death against powerful, worthy enemies. The Minotaur's gaze shifted to Percival's severed leg. The realization became clear in his mind. What he wanted was not Percival's head or heart. What he wanted was the sword. The sword was Percival's life. The Minotaur gripped his axe tightly and stood upright once more. Slowly, he walked along the very edge of the arc of light. The Minotaur focused. Percival remained motionless on the ground while the torches along the dungeon walls flickered softly. The Minotaur drew a deep breath and steadied himself. Slowly, he stepped forward and placed one foot inside the arc of light. At that instant, Percival's sword moved. The blade swung around with blinding speed. The Minotaur concentrated on the movement as the sword cut into his leg, slicing it clean off. Without hesitation, he dropped his axe directly into the sword's path, forcing the blade to stop. The Minotaur understood what had happened. By sacrificing his leg, the sword's speed had been slowed, even if only slightly. The blade lodged into the axe. A sharp crack followed. Then the sword snapped. Percival's eyes opened as he saw the broken blade. Before he could react, the Minotaur raised his axe and brought it down onto him. Percival could not respond. Blood burst outward, splattering across the floor and even across the Minotaur's body. Pieces of Percival's armor scattered through the hall along with the spreading blood. The Minotaur wheezed as he struggled to catch his breath. His axe remained buried deep in Percival's chest. In front of him, Percival still breathed, each breath heavy and strained. The Minotaur lifted his axe slightly and pressed his palm firmly against the wound. Silence settled over the hall. Percival looked downward and felt the crushing weight of the Minotaur's hand pressing against his chest. The Minotaur stood still, yet his thoughts roared inside his mind. He wanted more. He did not want the man to die yet. He wanted the man to suffer longer. He wanted to push him further. He wanted to keep fighting him. Percival slowly looked toward the Minotaur's face. A faint smile appeared on Percival's lips. The Minotaur's eyes widened as he looked down at him. The sight before him showed Percival's broken sword, his severed leg, and the fading strength within his body. The light inside Percival weakened further as cracks spread through it. Percival closed his eyes for the final time. At that moment, a new emotion quietly emerged within the demon beast. After defeating Percival, the Minotaur watched as Percival's body began to glow, slowly becoming wrapped in a bright light. As the radiance remained, the Minotaur's body started to grow bigger, stronger, and heavier. Every part of his body, his hands, arms, and chest, felt different from before. Within the light of leveling up, the Minotaur glanced at Percival's body and reflected that it would be somewhat unfortunate if all the wounds this man had given him were to vanish. The Minotaur drew in a deep breath. Percival's body then broke apart into tiny lights and disappeared. The Minotaur stood still, and before him lay the reward for killing the heavenly sword. In the labyrinth, when someone dies, whether human or monster, the corpse vanishes, leaving behind the items they carried, including whatever was inside their sack. The Minotaur reached toward the scattered pile of items and scooped up a handful. Among them were two particular items. He summoned his sack and placed them inside it. After taking another deep breath, he turned around and left the rest of the items behind. The Minotaur felt the urge to sleep for a while. Although his wounds had healed from leveling up, his muscles, especially his heart, were deeply exhausted. He walked away, leaving the rest of Percival's belongings on the ground, and continued deeper into the labyrinth. Several days later, rain poured down over the Sazerdan labyrinth on the first floor. A small monster was suddenly stabbed, dying as 2 coins dropped onto the ground. The one who had struck it was a child, smiling as he looked at the 2 coins left behind by the monster. Suddenly, a voice called out in excitement. The child watched as several adventurers carried different items out of the labyrinth. Among them was someone being carried as well, while a voice insisted that once they left the labyrinth he should be taken straight to the guild. The little boy continued watching as the group moved past him. He overheard one adventurer remark that with that amount, the man had already reached quite a high level, questioning why he would head to a place like that. Another adventurer responded that the only thing they knew for certain was that Moran was fortunate. The little boy stayed silent as all the adventurers finally exited the labyrinth. Back at Mycenae village, inside the Adventurers Guild, Gil Lynx offered an apology to Logan. He explained that he had been occupied with several errands and had ended up arriving late. Logan responded with an apology of his own, expressing regret for requiring Gil's attention during such a busy time. He asked whether Gil had already eaten breakfast. Gil Lynx replied that he had shared a meal with the king. Logan remarked that he would expect nothing less for a great sage. He then wondered whether the queens had also been present at the meal. Gil answered that only the second queen had attended. He explained that he had been told she had felt the beginning of a cold and had taken precautions that morning. Logan reflected on the mention of that morning as well. He considered whether it had been the second queen who told him this rather than the king. Gil asked whether that was how Logan had heard about it. Logan asked if he had been mistaken. Gil replied that he could not say for certain. Within the court, conflicts often emerged because of the many opinions and positions surrounding power and how it should be used. That was how things appeared to him. In the end, what determined anything was simply the abandonment of thought. Logan let out a sigh and remarked that he remembered hearing the same idea spoken several decades earlier. Gil then explained that from a person's perspective, monsters were seen as the monsters, yet from a monster's perspective, people were the monsters. He wondered if that was what Logan had been referring to. Logan confirmed that it was exactly that. The realization had once come as a great shock to him. It had convinced him that the way people dealt with monsters, rather than being the work of wicked individuals, was itself unjust. Gil told him that the matter involved the unjust standards through which people formed their thinking. To monsters, concepts such as happiness and unhappiness, justice and injustice, success and failure did not hold the same meanings they did for humans. Even so, he believed those ideas still existed to some degree. Humans and monsters shared certain common traits, reason and value. Logan sighed again and remarked that it seemed he crossed paths with monsters far more often than with people. Thinking about it further, he even wondered whether he could still be considered human. Gil gave a short scoff and replied that the remark was rather cruel. In that sense, Logan himself was being quite unjust. The two of them laughed together over the exchange. After some time passed in conversation, Gil asked about the Minotaur incident and what had ultimately come of it. From what he had heard below, the matter had reached even the higher levels. A knock on the door drew Logan's attention. He paused and remarked that someone should arrive shortly, since the tea had already run out. He then allowed the person outside to enter. Yadur stepped inside and greeted the guild president. Logan wondered whether the new tea had arrived. He then mentioned to Gil that although the Minotaur might be a monster, Yadur had still not lost to him. He wanted Gil to witness Yadur's actions, just as he had seen the entire situation unfold himself. Logan's eyes widened as he turned and noticed the expression on Yadur's face. He asked what had happened. In the lobby of the Adventurers Guild, a large crowd had gathered around a mountain of items. Yadur explained to Logan that, as could be seen, no matter how many times the item was appraised, it always produced the same result. The object in question was none other than that man's adventurer medal. Logan asked for it to be appraised once more. He insisted on one more appraisal. Gil told Logan not to trouble his subordinates any further. The contents of the sack alone were more than enough to raise a person's level. Items of such quantity could not belong to just any adventurer. The sheer amount of equipment present was already more than enough proof. Gil then wondered whether the group who had discovered the items was the party standing nearby. Yadur confirmed that they were the ones who had found them, pointing out that the man there was their leader, Moran. Moran clarified that he was not a leader and that they were not a party. The items he had found were simply too many for him to carry alone, so he had hired a few passers-by to help transport them. He also questioned whether those items truly belonged to the Heavenly Sword, doubting that such a thing could be possible. Gil asked which floor the items had been discovered on. A guild staff member replied that the group had reported finding them on the 6th floor, near the staircase that led down to the 5th floor. Gil reflected on that detail. The 6th floor seemed unusually low. He wondered what Lord Percival could have been doing on such a shallow level of the labyrinth. As the thought lingered, his eyes drifted across the pile of items and settled briefly on a pair of boots resting among them. Moran looked toward the guild president with impatience and urged that the mountain of items be appraised quickly. If the belongings truly came from the Heavenly Sword, then most of them would surely be rare items. He also reminded them of the regulations stating that half of the discovery should belong to the one who found it. Logan turned to Yadur and asked whether he could leave the rest of the matter in his hands. Yadur accepted the responsibility and stated that he would carry out the distribution process according to the established regulations. He would also wait for a copy of the list once the results of the item appraisals were completed. Logan expressed his thanks before leaving the scene and making his way toward the office. After Gil closed the door to Logan's office, he began speaking about the items among the remains. Among them had been the fool's boots. Seeing those boots reminded him of something Percival once mentioned. Monsters living beyond the 50th floor did not attack. Because of that, when returning from the deeper levels, Percival would equip the unnamed sword along with the fool's boots as weights, then dash upward toward the surface. It was something he had said he did as part of his training. The fool's boots were a cursed item. Once worn, they greatly reduced a person's physical ability. Logan suddenly slammed his fist against the table. Even in the deeper levels, and especially not on the 6th floor, there was not a monster alive capable of killing the heavenly sword. That would remain true even if he had been wearing the fool's boots. Logan's hand tightened into a clenched fist. Inside the guild president's office, Logan speaks with force. He insists that what killed the heavenly sword was not a monster. In his view, someone must have studied the heavenly sword's usual patterns and set a dishonest trap to catch him. Gil narrows his eyes as Logan continues. Logan declares that he cannot accept such a thing. He cannot allow it at all. In the labyrinth, no matter a person's rank or position, only their own strength decides the line between life and death. It is exactly because the labyrinth holds that balance that the heavenly sword loved it. He turned away from the glory of the surface world and from the ugly conflicts that came with it. Master Percival simply wished to live as an adventurer. Logan turns toward Gil and demands his support. He urges Gil to lend his power so they can expose the disgraceful trap that ensnared the heavenly sword. Gil tells Logan that such a demand is out of order. Logan shows confusion, and Gil calmly asks him to settle down and think the matter through carefully. Lord Percival's mysterious death occurred inside the labyrinth. At the same time, a certain abnormality has already been confirmed within that same labyrinth. Logan raises his voice in disbelief, asking whether Gil truly believes the heavenly sword was defeated by that Minotaur or whatever it is. To Logan, such a thing could only happen if the heavens and the earth themselves had been overturned. Gil replies that he also finds the idea hard to accept. Yet he asks Logan whether everything unfolding now does not resemble the incident involving Azel's daughter. Logan attempts to object, but Gil continues speaking. He explains that Percival's case could indeed cause trouble in the human world. Percival's position within the direct families and the name of the heavenly sword are, for better or worse, highly noticeable. However, focusing only on that would mean ignoring the abnormality that stands directly before them. Gil asks where the guild president's true duty lies, outside the labyrinth or inside it. Logan narrows his eyes and gradually regains his composure. He admits that Gil is correct. The thought he had just voiced was nothing more than abandoning clear judgment and casting aside his main responsibility. Logan lets out a quiet sigh and adds that such thinking means he is not qualified to be a guild president. Gil then reflects on the value others place on a person's life. He wonders whether the price people attach to someone else's life is merely the value of a corpse, or the worth of the memories that person left behind. Logan's distress over Lord Percival to such a degree shows that Percival had been a very dear friend. Logan lowers his gaze for a moment before speaking again. He states that the first priority is to face the Minotaur. After subduing and eliminating the abnormality within the labyrinth, they must determine how much of it is connected to the case of the heavenly sword. With urgency in his voice, Logan makes his request once more. He asks for Gil's help and calls upon the great magic user, Gil Lynx, to lend his power. Water droplets fall steadily inside the boss room on the 10th floor of the Sazerdan Labyrinth. The Minotaur rests there with its eyes open. A voice notices its presence and points out that it is here. A female warrior observes the creature and notes its massive size and thick arms. She wonders if this is the rumored unique one, remarking that it certainly appears unusually vigorous. A male warrior comments that there is a theory about unique types. According to that theory, the greater the abnormality of the creature, the higher the chance it may drop rare items. The witch reminds the group that they were only supposed to observe. She recalls that they were told to simply look and move on, suggesting they leave the small target alone and continue deeper. The female warrior responds that it should be fine. She explains that she wanted to test their formation before entering the 30th floor anyway. The male warrior laughs in agreement. He notes that preparation exercises are important. The witch sighs quietly, remarking that things always seem to end up this way. The Minotaur glances toward them and slowly rises to its feet. As the male warrior approaches, he remarks that the creature appears even larger when standing. Its size reminds him of an ogre. The witch observes that, despite its size, it is still just a Minotaur. She notes that they are ready and that they should quickly finish the task. The female warrior confirms that she is ready as well and signals that she can begin whenever they are. The male warrior tightens his grip on his weapon and steps forward, hoping the rumors about rare item drops will prove true. The Minotaur quietly watches as the male warrior rushes forward. In an instant, the Minotaur's fist strikes the male warrior directly in the face, launching him backward past the female warrior. The female warrior turns to check on him. In that moment, the Minotaur's foot comes down and crushes her. The three adventurers burst into light. The Minotaur does not realize it, but the adventurers' levels were just below 30. Earlier, after its difficult battle, the Minotaur possessed roughly the same level of strength as the three adventurers it had now killed with ease. After the fight, the Minotaur moves to a small pond within the room. It gathers water in its hands and drinks. Taking a slow breath, it then returns to its resting place beside the wall. This time, the level up did not only strengthen combat ability. It also brought a remarkable rise in intelligence. Originally, even among monsters with low intelligence, the Minotaur's mind had been particularly dull. After this level up, however, many mental abilities rose all at once. Recognition of information, understanding, analysis, memory, and overall processing all developed rapidly. The Minotaur let out a slow breath and closed his eyes. With his newly developed mind, he reflected on Percival's fight to the death. Within his thoughts, he replayed the battle again and again. He examined every possible action Percival could have taken and every move he himself could have chosen. Each moment was analyzed and reconsidered repeatedly. Through that reflection, the Minotaur came to understand once more that he had won a battle he should not have been able to win. The technique he faced had been terrifying. The opponent had been tremendously strong. It was the first battle that had shaken his heart to such a degree. The Minotaur's expression softened slightly as the memories returned. The beautiful arc Percival's sword had drawn through the empty air remained burned into his mind, a sight that would never leave him. Deep within the labyrinth, gray wolves gathered in the distance. Yet as the Minotaur passed through, his heavy footsteps echoing through the stone halls, the wolves suddenly jolted in alarm. One after another they scattered, running away and hiding from his presence. The Minotaur continued forward without slowing, eventually stopping before the staircase that led upward. A thought formed in his mind. The higher he climbed, the weaker the monsters became. Yet that swordsman had been aiming for the very top. The Minotaur narrowed his eyes as the thought settled within him. A strong desire formed in his mind. He wanted to see the place the swordsman had been aiming for. Perhaps it existed there. Perhaps that was where the thing he had always been searching for waited. More enemies. Even deadlier battles. The legend finally moved against the Minotaur that had shaken the labyrinth. The great magic user, Gil Lynx. Elder of the Baldmost Kingdom's Magic Academy. A legendary figure whose many heroic deeds and stories were told like fairy tales. To Logan, he was both an ally he had adventured with since youth and a master who had taught him how to become an adventurer from the very beginning. In the Sazerden Labyrinth, on the 7th floor, 3 female adventurers stood together. A female warrior wondered if the creature ahead could possibly be the one from the rumor. A female magic user replied that she had never seen anything so large and hairy in her life. Neslo observed it carefully and remarked that it certainly had the head of a cow. The 3 adventurers watched as the Minotaur walked through the halls of the 7th floor. As it drew closer, the female warrior questioned what they should do. Neslo warned that attacking carelessly would be dangerous. She decided to fire Vunker's arrow. The arrow was powerful enough to fatally wound a normal cowhead. By using it, they could measure the creature's strength. Neslo took aim and released the arrow. The Minotaur saw it coming and raised his axe, blocking the arrow. The moment the arrow struck the axe, it exploded. Smoke and debris burst outward as the 3 adventurers quickly hid behind a nearby corner. When the smoke cleared, the Minotaur's hand had been blown apart. He stared quietly at his bleeding arm. Neslo scoffed at the sight. Only the wrist had been destroyed. The creature was tough. It was clearly a unique type. That meant the plan had worked. With one hand gone, its attacking power was already cut in half. If they used another arrow and destroyed the other hand, the creature would be left powerless. The Minotaur continued to look at his bleeding arm. A memory surfaced in his mind. He recalled the adventurer who had once used a potion. He placed his sword on the ground and reached into his sack. The adventurers watched in disbelief as the Minotaur pulled out several red potions and dropped them into his mouth. He crushed the potions between his teeth. Moments later, they saw his arm grow back. Neslo's jaw fell open. Panic surged through her as she ordered a retreat. The 3 of them ran as fast as they could through the corridor. In her mind, disbelief repeated again and again. It was impossible. The sack and those potions were benefits that only humans could receive. Only adventurers who had pledged themselves to the gods were granted such blessings. She glanced back once more and scoffed in disbelief. That rule clearly did not apply to unique types. Meanwhile, the Minotaur slowly opened and closed his newly regenerated hand. Just like the shocked adventurers, he was also surprised. Through imitation, he had learned how to use the red potion. Its effects were remarkable. It restored physical strength, healed wounds, and even regenerated lost body parts. The Minotaur clenched his fist. He reached into the sack, took hold of his axe, then picked up his sword from the ground. With both weapons in hand, he turned and walked away. At the same time, outside the Sazerdan Labyrinth, on the outskirts of Mycenae City, the Adventurers Guild stood busy as usual. Adventurers gathered in the lobby, chatting among themselves. Inside the guild president's office, a single flower rested on the desk, glowing faintly under the light. Logan sat behind the desk and looked at the flower. In his mind, he acknowledged that such a thing was only to be expected from the heavenly sword. Even so, properly judging the value of something like this would take more than a month. He stretched his arms and let out a quiet sigh. His gaze returned to the flower, and the memory of Gil giving it to him surfaced in his mind. His thoughts turned back to the Minotaur. He wondered what exactly was happening inside the labyrinth. Since the first report had arrived, sightings had continued to come in. The creature had been seen both above and below the 10th floor. That meant it had clearly been moving between floors. The situation made him think of an adventurer. A monster that moved through the labyrinth like an adventurer. The idea sounded absurd, yet he continued following the thought. If such a creature truly existed, then it might also receive the same benefits that adventurers gained inside the labyrinth. One of those benefits was the ability to move between floors. There were other benefits as well. The use of potions. The storage ability of a sack. His thoughts paused for a moment. Then his eyes widened as a realization struck him. Leveling up. If the creature functioned like an adventurer, then it could grow stronger by defeating enemies and gaining experience. By leveling up, both physical strength and mental ability would increase. That possibility explained what had happened to Podge's party. If the Minotaur had leveled up, then it must have been the one who killed them. Logan struggled to accept the conclusion forming in his mind. Adventurers gained more experience when they defeated stronger opponents. If the Minotaur had done the same, then one possibility rose to the surface. If the heavenly sword had been killed by it. He felt a lump rise in his throat as the thought continued to unfold. The question appeared in his mind. What level could the Minotaur have reached by now? At that moment, the door opened as Yadur entered the room and greeted the guild president. Logan jumped slightly at the sudden entrance and reacted sharply toward Yadur for startling him like that. Yadur calmly noted that he had knocked before entering. He then observed Logan's pale appearance and wondered if something was wrong. Logan answered that the more he thought about the situation, the stranger it seemed. He then shifted the conversation and asked whether something had happened. Yadur informed him that the housekeeper of the Merculius family had arrived. The visitor wished to consult with the guild president. Logan reacted with surprise at the mention of the Merculius family. He confirmed that they had not yet informed them about the heavenly sword. Yadur confirmed that the notice was still being prepared. Logan considered the situation. If that was the case, then the visit was not related to the heavenly sword. Yet the matter must still be serious if the housekeeper had come personally. He gave his approval for them to be brought into the room. A moment later, Yadur announced the visitors. The housekeeper of the Merculius family, Master Panja Laban, accompanied by Master Julius of the Zelger family, was now entering the room. After Yadur announced the arrival of Logan's guests, the housekeeper stepped forward and introduced himself as Panja Laban. Logan bowed respectfully and expressed that it was an honor to welcome such a noble guest. He introduced himself as Logan, the president of Mycenae's Adventurers Guild. As Yadur prepared the tea, Logan invited them to take their seats. Once Logan and his guests settled inside the office, Panja offered an apology for calling upon him without notice. Logan calmly replied that he had heard there was something Panja wished to discuss with him. Before addressing the matter, Panja stated that he would first like to introduce Master Julius. Logan's eyebrows rose slightly at the word Master, the title catching his attention. Panja continued, explaining that Master Julius was actually the one accompanying him, and that Zelger was the household name connected to him. He further clarified that the name of his father's house was Merculius. Master Julius was then presented as the legitimate successor of the Merculius family, Master Percival Khan de la Merculius Mortis. Logan's eyes widened in surprise as the meaning settled in. The words successor and head echoed in his thoughts, leading to a sudden realization. His reaction burst out instinctively as he recognized the implication that this meant the son of the heavenly sword. The thought followed immediately that such a fact would mean the man had been married. A brief silence filled the room. Logan quickly stopped himself, lowered his head, and bowed deeply in apology, offering his humblest pardon. Panja released a quiet sigh and explained that there was no need for him to lower himself in such a way. Adventurers followed their own customs, and in this place they themselves were the outsiders within the territory of adventurers. He added that Logan was also Lord Percival's mentor and supporter here in the Adventurers Guild. Master Percival had often said that he felt comfortable in this place because of the guild president's watchful care. The man's strong wanderlust had often brought him back here. They felt gratitude toward both the Labyrinth and Logan, because their lord had always been able to return home whenever he spent time in Mycenae. Panja paused briefly when mentioning the heavenly sword, then corrected himself and referred to him instead as Lord Percival. After that moment of hesitation, he stated that they should return to the main point, as there was something he wanted them to see. Panja reached into the sack he carried. Logan's attention lingered on it, briefly wondering about the contents. Panja then pulled out a box and opened it, revealing a cracked crystal ball inside. Panja explained that the waves of life belonging to his lord were recorded within that crystal ball. Logan quietly repeated the words waves of life, his gaze shifting momentarily to the flower of Gil Lynx resting on his desk. Panja continued, explaining that it had been Master Julius's daily routine to check the crystal ball once or twice every day. By evening, however, the flame within the crystal ball had vanished. Yet yesterday morning, everything had still appeared normal. Julius struggled to hold back a cry as Panja continued speaking. If the guild president knew anything about Lord Percival's whereabouts, they asked that he please tell them. Logan thought for a moment before responding that they had, in fact, been preparing to inform them. He rang a bell, and Yadur soon entered the room with quiet politeness. The others watched as Yadur placed several documents onto the table and instructed Panja to sign the receipt. After Panja finished signing, Yadur excused himself for the interruption and quietly left the room. Logan and his guests were once again alone. Logan explained that the documents included a letter addressed to the Mercurius house and a list of the items that had been recovered, along with Lord Percival's adventurer medal. He then informed them that yesterday, on the 6th floor of the Sazerdan Labyrinth, Lord Percival's remains had been discovered. He expressed his regret. Panja quietly excused himself as he began checking the list of recorded items, while Logan remained seated and waited patiently. Julius finally spoke, mentioning his father. Logan stayed silent as Julius wondered whether this had been what his father wanted. Logan found himself unable to answer. Panja then spoke to Julius, recalling that Lord Percival had always said the thing he enjoyed most was entering the labyrinth and facing the honorable duels within it. He had often stated that even if the day came when he collapsed helplessly there, he would still have fulfilled all of his desires. Logan reflected on those words. Duels and the subjugation of monsters did indeed sound like something the heavenly sword would say. Logan then informed them that an investigation was already underway. Very soon, it would be solved. That man would surely bring everything to light without fail. The truth behind what had happened to Lord Percival, and the events involving the Minotaur, would all be uncovered. Julius remained with tears in his eyes. Meanwhile, Logan's gaze drifted toward the glowing flower resting on his desk. He spoke of Gil Lynx as both his friend and his master. The legendary great wizard would surely uncover the truth. The glowing flower shone brightly upon the desk. Meanwhile, deep within the Sazerdan Labyrinth, the Minotaur smashed through the 4th floor's boss room, forcing his way inside. After defeating the boss, the Minotaur picked up the items left behind and began observing them. In that moment, he suddenly sensed a magic ball approaching him and quickly dodged. The magic ball halted near him instead of passing by. The Minotaur's eyes widened as it detonated. As the smoke slowly faded, Gil Lynx stepped forward into the boss room. Clad in armor, he remained focused while the lingering smoke cleared around him. The Minotaur immediately charged forward. Gil responded by summoning 2 more magic balls toward him. The spheres began to glow, causing the Minotaur to stop his advance and step back. When the magic balls exploded, the Minotaur released a roar. Gil Lynx remained calm. With a simple snap of his fingers, the moment the Minotaur leapt into the air, several magical thorns suddenly pierced through his body. The Minotaur coughed out blood while Gil Lynx watched closely. Even so, the Minotaur clenched his teeth and endured. Gil Lynx's eyes widened in the next instant as the Minotaur swung his sword and struck Gil Lynx across the shoulder. A sudden surge of anger filled the clash, the violent force pressing against the calm precision of magic. The confrontation raised a single question in the heat of battle: whether raw violence could overcome magic. Before entering the Sazerdan Labyrinth, Gil Lynx had removed the ring from his finger and cast a spell upon it, transforming the ring into a flower. After that, he gently blew his breath into the flower, causing it to emit a faint glow. He then offered the flower to Logan, believing it would be better for him to keep it. Logan examined the object and recognized it as something resembling a cerulean shell. Gil explained that the flower carried the vibrations of his own life essence. As long as the light continued to shine, it meant that he was still alive. The arrangement existed as a precaution, especially after what had happened to Lord Percival. Gil then picked up his helmet and prepared to depart. He added that if the light were ever to disappear, a report of the matter should immediately be sent to the king. Logan responded with mild skepticism, recalling the rumor that Gil had supposedly sold his favor to the king of the underworld and received a body that could not die. Gil simply laughed at the remark, noting that the rumors surrounding him had grown quite imaginative. The pinnacle of wisdom and guidance descended upon the battlefield, crushing the clashing mass of iron and flesh. Back in the present moment, the Minotaur remained suspended in the air, restrained by the thorns created by Gil's magic. At the same time, Gil himself had nearly been cut in half by the Minotaur's sword. The Minotaur clenched his teeth in resistance. In the next instant, Gil's body suddenly shone with a burst of light. The Minotaur's eyes widened as the glow intensified. Gil had already triggered the technique known as a decoy bomb. A violent surge of magic struck the Minotaur. The powerful shock immobilized the creature for a moment before throwing it backward and slamming it against the ground. Steam rose from its body as the flesh hissed under the burning effect of the magic. Gil calmly stepped forward, approaching the fallen monster. He evaluated the situation with careful thought. The creature's combat power appeared comparable to that of ordinary individuals, roughly equivalent to someone around level 40. The situation itself felt abnormal. Even if Gil had not been fighting at his best, the creature still did not seem powerful enough to have killed Lord Percival. At that moment, the Minotaur suddenly reached toward the sack hanging at its side. Gil's eyes widened at the unexpected action as he watched the Minotaur pull several potions from the sack and swallow them. The sight caused Gil to reflect quietly. The behavior resembled that of an adventurer. In more than 50 years of experience as an adventurer, he had never encountered such a unique creature. The circumstances inside the labyrinth felt increasingly strange. The possibility briefly crossed his mind that the creature might somehow be a fragment of the evil god. The Minotaur then rose to its feet once again, its wounds already healed. Far away in the city of Mycenae, Gil's flower continued to shine with a steady light. Inside the Adventurers Guild, within the office of the guild president, Panja placed a list of recovered items on the table. He explained the rule regarding the belongings of humans who die inside the labyrinth. Such possessions become the property of the guild and of the one who acquires them. Even if a will exists, it does not apply under those circumstances. However, if the bereaved family makes a request, they are allowed the chance to buy the property back. Logan confirmed that the explanation was correct. Panja then stated his intention. As a first step, he wished to buy back the 3 items marked on the list. Logan looked over the items written there: the Ring of Laika, Bolton's amulet, and Endy's shield. The names were unfamiliar to him, and he reflected that he had never heard of such items before. Still, he informed Panja that there would be no issue with the request. The price, however, would have to wait until an official appraisal had been completed. Panja responded that the cost did not matter. The greater concern was what followed after that. The list did not include Calden's dagger and Alestra's bracelet, both of which had been in Lord Percival's possession. The absence of those items raised an important question. Logan paused when he heard the mention of Alestra's bracelet. Panja then clarified the significance of that object. The bracelet was a sacred treasure originally granted to the founder king by the goddess Farah. Later, it had been passed down to the first member of the Merculius family. Without that sacred treasure, Master Julius would not be able to take over as the successor to Lord Percival. Logan reflected on the matter and acknowledged the point. When the head of the Merculius family assumed the position, the ritual required the person to wear Alestra's bracelet and enter upon invitation from the king. Panja continued the explanation of the custom. During the ceremony, the holy figure would lift the bracelet and establish the symbolic connection between the founder king's prince and the current head of the family. The act itself functioned mainly as a tradition. Even so, the loss of the bracelet would cause consequences far beyond simple embarrassment. The successor would lose more than reputation alone. Because of that, the bracelet had to be recovered. As for Calden's dagger, Panja acknowledged that its absence could be tolerated for the moment if it could not be found immediately. The same leniency could not be applied to Alestra's bracelet. The guild president then suggested approaching the matter step by step. Percival's remains had been discovered on the 6th floor. Because of that, the first question concerned what had happened to the bracelet and the dagger at that time. Panja considered the situation and concluded that it was unlikely the Lord would have simply lost them. Both objects carried special blessings, which made it difficult to imagine that they had been damaged and vanished. Logan followed the reasoning further. If that were the case, then the only explanation pointed toward whatever had killed Percival on the 6th floor. The bracelet and the dagger must have been lost either during that encounter or sometime after it. Panja then wondered what kind of being could possibly have taken them. The thought itself felt improbable. Something capable of attacking the Lord and stealing from him seemed almost impossible to imagine. Even so, the doubt remained. With some hesitation, he raised the question of whether the acquirer had truly submitted every item to the guild. Logan confirmed that the procedure had been followed. Whenever items were submitted, the guild conducted an interview with the acquirer while using their original lie-detecting magic, provided the acquirer gave consent. The guild had questioned all 19 individuals who had submitted items and assisted with transportation. They had also been asked whether they had any involvement in the death of the original owner or possessed any clues about what might have caused it. Every one of them had been confirmed free of suspicion. Logan added that this result essentially ruled out the possibility that some passing third party had taken the items. Anyone who brought objects to the guild would receive their proper price in return. There would be no real reason to hide them instead of submitting them openly. Panja then considered another possibility. The situation might involve someone who wished harm upon the Mercurius family, someone who had ensnared Lord Percival in a trap, taken the 2 items, and hidden them somewhere within the labyrinth where they might still remain. Panja had raised the possibility of a third party. Logan considered the idea and understood the implication behind it. If the death of Lord Percival were to become widely known and the appointment of a successor became unavoidable, the missing bracelet could be used to corner the Mercurius family or to impose certain conditions in exchange for its return. That interpretation aligned with what Panja had suggested. Even so, Logan judged that the probability of such a situation was extremely low. The labyrinth allowed visits for no longer than 7 days. Even for the most experienced veteran parties, it was not a place where someone could remain hidden for an extended period of time. Panja acknowledged the reasoning. If such words came from the one known as the Dragon Slayer, then there was little room to doubt them. Logan laughed lightly at the mention, realizing that Panja was familiar with those old stories. His attention then shifted to the ownership stamps placed on the 2 missing items. Panja agreed with the point being raised and explained further. The engraved seals and the callback magic placed on them had been crafted with the highest level of skill. After the crystal's light had gone out, 2 engravers had taken turns examining it, yet no reaction had appeared. Logan reflected on this outcome. Since the items could not be observed from outside while they were inside the labyrinth, the bracelet and the dagger must still remain somewhere within it. If that were true, another possibility remained. The acquirer might have overlooked them or perhaps dropped them along the way. Within Logan's thoughts, another idea surfaced quietly. There was also the possibility that a monster had taken them. Panja noticed the change in Logan's expression and sensed that something had crossed his mind. He asked whether Logan might know anything related to the matter. Logan responded by explaining the situation that had occurred within the labyrinth. After hearing the account regarding the Minotaur, Panja reflected on it with clear surprise. The existence of such a Minotaur seemed difficult to accept. He spent a moment thinking before turning his attention back to the matter at hand. Gil Lynx was currently in the labyrinth investigating the situation, and the most reasonable course would normally be to wait for the results of that investigation. However, if the situation truly was as Logan had described, remaining idle would not be acceptable. Panja expressed regret for speaking so directly and requested permission to enter the labyrinth. By going inside, they would be able to determine on which floor the lost items might be located. With the help of an engraver, the first step would be to investigate whether the acquirer might have dropped them somewhere along the path up to the 6th floor. Logan explained that the guild did not possess the authority to restrict anyone's access to the labyrinth. Before he could raise any further objections, Panja quickly acknowledged that he was fully aware of the dangers involved. Logan paused to consider the matter before giving his agreement. Escorts and guides would be assigned to accompany the expedition. The possibility that malicious individuals might have interfered could not be completely dismissed. Although he had been retired for many decades, Logan expressed the hope that Panja would allow him to lend his assistance as well. Back in the Sazerdan labyrinth, within the boss room on the 4th floor, Gil Lynx stood without injury while the Minotaur struggled to steady its breathing. Gil briefly glanced at the creature before snapping his fingers. In response, several magic knives shot forward toward the Minotaur. The Minotaur reacted quickly and avoided most of them, but one blade still struck its leg and sliced it off. The loss of the leg caused the creature to lose balance and crash down to the ground. Gil had already raised a protective shield around himself, preventing the debris scattered by the Minotaur from reaching him. As the Minotaur attempted to regain its footing, Gil immediately cast a fireball and sent it flying toward the creature. The Minotaur used its arms to push its body away from the incoming fireball. However, Gil simply lifted his fingers, and the fireball adjusted its path, following the Minotaur's movement. The Minotaur's eyes widened as the attack continued to pursue it. Before it could react further, the fireball exploded directly against its chest. The force of the blast hurled the Minotaur backward until its body slammed into the wall. Gil remained where he stood, calmly watching as the wall behind the Minotaur cracked and crumbled. When the dust settled, the Minotaur's body appeared scorched from the explosion. Despite that, the Minotaur quickly reached into its sack, pulled out several potions, and swallowed them again. The effect was immediate. Its body regenerated at once, and the wounds closed as if they had never been there. As the healing finished, the Minotaur drew several heavy breaths. Within its thoughts, the creature recognized the opponent's strength. Every single attack carried deadly force, and those attacks were controlled freely without any pause. Compared with the magic users the Minotaur had fought before, this one stood far above them. The figure reminded the Minotaur of someone it had faced earlier. The memory of Percival surfaced in its mind, and the Minotaur formed a slight grin at the recollection. Gil, meanwhile, evaluated the situation with careful thought. The Minotaur revealed an opening whenever it used its potions at long distance. That moment could provide a chance to finish the creature. Acting on that conclusion, Gil began gathering magic in his hands. A bright glow formed around them as his body lifted slightly into the air. With the power gathered, Gil rushed straight toward the Minotaur. The Minotaur registered the movement and realized how fast the man was flying toward it. It reacted quickly and swung its weapon in front of itself. Gil avoided the strike with ease and vanished from the Minotaur's sight, appearing behind it. The Minotaur realized the change a moment too late. Gil appeared again and cut off the Minotaur's hand. The creature struggled to process what had happened. Before it could make another move, Gil had already appeared beside it. In the middle of the fierce battle between Gil and the Minotaur, Gil suddenly appeared directly in front of the creature. The Minotaur reacted immediately and blocked the incoming strike. Even so, the force behind Gil's attack knocked the sword from the Minotaur's grasp and pushed the creature backward. Gil moved forward at once to press the attack. At the same time, the Minotaur hurriedly searched through the sack at its side. Within its thoughts, the creature realized it needed something, anything, it could use to strike back or counter the man standing before it. In the next instant, the Minotaur's eyes widened. It pulled its hand out of the sack and leapt forward, raising its fist to strike Gil. Gil watched the Minotaur rush toward him and judged the action to be futile. He raised his hand, and the Minotaur's entire body stopped in midair, held in place by his magic. However, in the next moment, the magic in Gil's hand suddenly vanished. Gil's eyes widened in surprise as he realized what had happened. On the Minotaur's hand he noticed a familiar artifact. The object was the bracelet of Alina, the heirloom of the Mercurius family known for its power of magic nullification. The sight confirmed that Lord Percival truly had been involved. Even so, another question immediately followed. If that bracelet had such restrictions, why was its power now working in the Minotaur's hands? At the same time, far away in the guild president's office, Logan raised a related point during the discussion. The bracelet of Alina had specific limitations placed upon it by the goddess. Panja confirmed that this was correct. Logan then considered the implication. If those conditions were true, an outsider should not be able to misuse the bracelet's power. Panja clarified the matter further. The use of its power by an outsider was impossible. Only the head of the Mercurius family could wield its ability, and only someone recognized as worthy by that head of the family could be allowed to use it. Back in the Sazerdan Labyrinth, the Minotaur let out a roar as its fist drove forward and struck Gil. The impact echoed through the chamber with a loud boom. The Minotaur kept its fist pressed against Gil and watched the man's body remain motionless. Then, in the next moment, the ring on Gil's finger began to glow with a dark light. A beam of magic shot out from Gil's ring, but the Minotaur reacted quickly and avoided it. The creature noticed the ring still glowing and clenched its teeth as the realization struck that the man before it was still alive. In response, the Minotaur drove its fist into Gil once more, then again and again. Each blow followed the last as the Minotaur roared and continued to strike. Under the relentless assault, Gil's body was torn apart while the Minotaur kept pounding forward with repeated punches. After some time, the Minotaur finally stopped. It raised its hand and looked down at what remained of Gil's flattened body while drawing heavy breaths. Then, without warning, dark particles began to rise from the ruined body. The Minotaur's eyes widened at the sight, and it quickly stepped back. The creature watched as the dark particles gathered and grew thicker, becoming denser and denser as they twisted together into coiling shapes that resembled tentacles. The sight unfolding before it seemed difficult to accept. Through the air, the memory of Logan's earlier words seemed to echo faintly. The old rumor returned to mind, the one claiming that Gil had once placed the king of the underworld in his debt and had received a body that could not die. By that moment, the dense dark specter forming around Gil's body had fully taken shape. After a deadly struggle, the old sorcerer underwent a transformation, turning into a fierce and truly formidable beast. As Gil's new body hovered ominously in the air, the hairs across the Minotaur's body rose stiffly. A sharp thought ran through his mind as he struggled to understand the sight before him, questioning what kind of creature this could possibly be. At that same moment, Gil moved one of his tentacles and surged forward without hesitation, reaching out to seize the Minotaur's amputated arm. The severed arm quickly began to boil and melt. The Minotaur's eyes widened at the disturbing sight, and panic stirred as the bubbling in the arm began spreading further. A frustrated thought flashed through his mind as he realized the danger. The Minotaur scoffed and struck the tentacle with a punch, yet even with the bracelet of Alina, the tentacle did not move at all. He continued striking the tentacles repeatedly from different angles, his teeth clenched as he forced his body to respond. Then he grabbed the infected portion of his own arm, tore it away, and threw it aside. Taking a step backward, the Minotaur watched closely as Gil pulled the discarded arm away and melted it down completely. The Minotaur stood still for a moment while Gil observed him with careful attention. Catching his breath, the Minotaur suddenly remembered the bleeding arm and reached for potions. Before he could use them, Gil attacked again with his tentacles. The Minotaur quickly dodged, but the sudden movement caused him to lose his grip on the potions, sending them falling to the ground. Gil continued his rapid assault with the tentacles, while the Minotaur avoided each strike in quick succession. As he dodged yet another attack, his eyes widened when he was suddenly caught off guard. One of Gil's tentacles had wrapped around his leg. Gil's eyes glowed, and a glow spread across his entire body as he tightened his grip on the Minotaur. The Minotaur hurriedly searched through his sack, his thoughts racing as he realized the previous blow had not been effective and that he needed something stronger. His hand found a dagger, which he quickly pulled out before stabbing the tentacle with it. Gil paused the moment the blade struck his tentacle. The Minotaur scoffed and pushed the dagger deeper with force, causing the tentacle to split into two. The severed portion of Gil's tentacle melted away, and the coil wrapped around the Minotaur's leg loosened. The Minotaur found it hard to believe that the dagger he had drawn so hastily was one of the Merculius family's 5 great treasures, obtained together with Alestra's bracelet during the narrow passage between life and death with the heavenly sword. The weapon was Calden's dagger, a treasure that granted status ailment removal, poison resistance, and the blessing of sacred attributes. Gil rushed forward with his tentacles, but the Minotaur reacted quickly and slashed at them with the dagger. Gil immediately pulled back, retreating from the strike, while the Minotaur showed a brief grin before charging straight toward him with the dagger ready. In response, Gil gathered his tentacles together, coiling them into one mass as the Minotaur roared and continued his advance. Gil did not stop. The Minotaur swung the dagger toward Gil, but his eyes suddenly flashed open in surprise as his body crashed onto the ground. When he looked back, he realized what had happened. Gil had wrapped his entire body with tentacles. The Minotaur groaned in pain as Gil, remaining at a distance, continued surrounding him with more tentacles. Gil's body had split in half, dedicating his own form entirely to tightening the coils around the Minotaur. The Minotaur collapsed to the ground, his body already riddled with poison. A sharp thought ran through his mind as he realized the danger of the situation and how quickly it was worsening. As his body slowly began to melt away, he forced himself to remain focused, pushing aside the creeping despair and directing his thoughts toward finding a way out. The battle was not finished yet. His eyes suddenly opened wide, and his gaze shifted toward the nearby potions that had fallen earlier. They were still lying on the ground, unbroken. The memory of them returned to him at once. While Gil's tentacles continued eating away at his body, the Minotaur slowly crawled toward the potions. Reaching them, he forced his mouth open and managed to push the potions inside. In the next instant, his body suddenly burst apart into many pieces. Gil, now drawn inward and stretched into a small ball of darkness, remained still as he quietly observed the melted remains of the Minotaur. The jaw, bones, scattered remains, and the bracelet of Alestra were left behind. Gil continued watching, waiting in silence. Then, suddenly, a hand appeared. An arm followed. The Minotaur emerged once more, seized Calden's dagger, and immediately thrust it straight through Gil. Gil did not react in time and was struck. The Minotaur's body slowly regenerated, and as his face formed again, a grin appeared as he stood before Gil. He pushed the dagger deeper into Gil's body. Gil responded by sending his tentacles forward to attack, but the Minotaur roared and slammed Gil's body down onto the ground. Filled with anger, the Minotaur forced the dagger even deeper into Gil. Gil's tentacles continued moving for a moment, but a second later they faded away and vanished. The Minotaur remained still for several moments. Then he slowly raised his fist before lowering himself to the ground. His breathing was heavy as he reflected on the battle, recognizing how incredible and formidable the enemy had been. A clear thought passed through his mind as he realized that without the strength, experience, and the items he had gathered until now, he would have been killed. Gil's original body suddenly began to glow, and small lights gathered around it before everything faded away, leaving behind all of his belongings. The Minotaur reflected on how remarkable humans were, wondering how such seemingly insignificant beings could rise to such heights. With that thought, he picked up Calden's dagger and resolved that he too would continue forward. The possibility of becoming stronger remained within reach. Greater resilience, greater endurance, and greater strength still awaited him. Driven by that thought, the Minotaur struck the air with his fist in a gesture of victory. 1 hour later, after the battle between the Minotaur and Gil Lynx had ended, he climbed up another floor. This time he arrived within the Sazerdan Labyrinth's first floor. The Minotaur looked straight ahead, recognizing the distant light. A quiet thought crossed his mind as he considered that beyond that glow likely lay the place toward which that sword had once been aimed. He paused and reflected again, wondering whether the thing he had constantly been searching for existed somewhere beyond that light. At the end of the tunnel, where the light shone, the city of Mycenae rested. A deadly struggle against even stronger enemies awaited ahead. In the village of Mycenae, children ran happily, old men rested peacefully, people celebrated together, and a baby slept quietly. The Minotaur carried a faint smile as he walked toward the light. The Minotaur walked along the first floor of the Sazerdan Labyrinth, moving steadily toward the labyrinth's exit. His thoughts lingered on the faint light ahead. Just beyond that glow, perhaps, lay the thing he had been searching for. A tiny monster hurried away from him, fleeing as the Minotaur advanced, his heavy steps echoing while he moved forward. The Minotaur suddenly stopped after sensing something unusual. His gaze shifted downward, where a little boy stood before him. The child's breathing was heavy and uneven. The Minotaur studied him in silence, wondering what this frail creature was supposed to be. The boy's hands trembled, and his feet struggled to stay steady as he stood there, still breathing hard. Then, without warning, the boy rushed forward toward the Minotaur. The Minotaur felt a brief moment of surprise. In his mind, the thought formed that this weak and tiny creature intended to challenge him. Someone so small and fragile could not possibly leave even a single scratch on his body. The boy raised his sword, preparing to strike. At that moment, the Minotaur flinched slightly as he noticed the boy's eyes. Something about them stirred a memory. The child let out a cry and thrust his weapon forward, driving it into the Minotaur's leg. The Minotaur looked down quietly, watching the boy take several heavy breaths before the child's body finally collapsed. As the boy lay on the ground, the Minotaur continued observing him. The sound of soft snoring followed. The Minotaur realized the child had fallen asleep. The situation made little sense to him. The question lingered in his mind about why the boy had chosen to stand and face him rather than run away. Weak creatures usually fled at once and hid themselves. Another thought followed close behind. Somehow the boy had managed to wound his flesh. The strike had been slow and clumsy, and the weapon itself looked crude. The Minotaur struggled to understand it, yet a realization began to form. In a certain way, they were the same. The child's eyes carried the same look he had once seen in that powerful warrior, the eyes of someone who fought. The Minotaur recognized it clearly. This boy resembled what he himself had once been. Small and weak, lacking both strength and skill, and even holding an improper weapon. Yet through fighting again and again, such a creature would grow larger and stronger. The Minotaur understood this path well, because it was the same path that had shaped him into what he was now. The Minotaur paused for a moment before slowly lowering himself to one knee. A quiet resolve formed within his thoughts. The small one should become strong. Strength should come quickly. One day, the child would grow into a powerful opponent who could stand against him and provide true challenge, just like those swordsmen had once done. Until that day arrived, the Minotaur would continue growing stronger as well. His gaze remained fixed on the labyrinth's exit. At the same time, Logan and Panja arrived at the Sazerdan Labyrinth. Logan, Panja, and the others stood prepared near the entrance. Logan explained that he would personally confirm the situation. They would check each floor while descending to the 6th floor together with the Seal Magician, then return to the surface regardless of whether the bracelet and dagger were found. Panja then asked Prince Julius to remain in the carriage. Julius quietly nodded. Logan and the others began climbing toward the labyrinth entrance. Logan remarked that the situation was unexpected. He had never imagined that Panja, the head of the house, had once been an adventurer. He wondered if Panja must have belonged to a rather high class during that time. Panja responded that it was something from the past. There had once been a period in his life when he pursued only strength. He had done so in order to repay the great blessings granted to him by the Mercurius clan. Logan started to press further, but Panja brushed the matter aside. At that moment, the Seal Magician suddenly called out to Lord Laban. His voice carried urgency. The group followed the direction of the magician's pointing finger and saw an exhausted little boy slowly walking out from the labyrinth. Logan looked at the child with surprise and noted the strangeness of seeing a child in such a place. The Seal Magician quickly pointed again, drawing attention to the boy's right hand. There, clearly visible, was the bracelet of Alastra. They hurried toward the boy. A knight stepped forward and announced that the young Prince Julius had been brought along. Panja stood before the child and introduced himself as Panja Laban, asking for the boy's name. The boy answered that his name was Panzel. Logan quietly observed the scene, noticing how the young boy did not shrink back even while standing in front of a large and powerful man. Panja then asked Panzel whether the bracelet had been obtained inside the labyrinth. The boy confirmed that it had. Panja asked if he would explain how he came to acquire it. Panzel agreed and began describing what had happened. He explained that his mother was sick and that he needed copper coins for her. Because of that, he had entered the 1st floor of the labyrinth. This was now the third day he had spent there. Logan reflected on the third day. It was true that even amateurs without a position of grace could enter the first floor of the labyrinth. Because of that, greedy people sometimes went there in search of copper coins. Those kinds of people spread their hostility carelessly, and the spiny rats, creatures that attacked anyone hostile toward them, would swarm and gnaw them to death. This meant the boy had fought while directing his hostility only toward his intended target, avoiding the others around him. It was the kind of control an experienced adventurer would show. Spending 3 days in the labyrinth like this could not simply be luck. Logan's thoughts settled on the boy. Panzel explained that earlier that day, the second spiny rat he had killed dropped 2 copper coins. After picking them up and raising his head, he noticed something standing there. Panja leaned forward, asking what had been there. Panzel described the monster. It had been covered in hair, incredibly large, with horns on its head that resembled those of a cow. Panja's eyes widened. Logan's jaw fell open as the realization struck him. The possibility was hard to believe. Panja wondered if the creature was the monster known as the Minotaur. Panzel admitted that he did not know its name. Logan called out to Panja before quickly apologizing. He asked if he could return to the guild for a moment. There was something he needed to confirm immediately. Panja gave his understanding. Logan then hurried away at once. Panja lowered himself back down and turned his attention again to Panzel, asking what had happened afterward. Panzel explained that he believed he would die if he did not fight. Because of that, he prepared his knife and jumped at the monster. The servant knight reacted in shock at the thought of someone jumping onto a minotaur. Panzel calmly confirmed it. However, because of the monster's size, he had only been able to reach around its foot. After that moment, having used all of his strength, his consciousness faded. Panja asked if he had lost consciousness. Panzel confirmed that he had. When he eventually woke up, the monster was gone. His knife and the bracelet were in his hands. The bracelet appeared expensive, so he wondered if it might be worth a lot of money. Because of that thought, he took it and left the labyrinth. Not long after leaving, someone called out to him. The seal magician considered the situation and concluded that, based on the circumstances, the only explanation was that the Minotaur had left them alive. Yet the question of its purpose remained unclear. Julius believed it had been done as a reward. Panzel wondered if they wanted the bracelet he had found. However, since he had picked it up himself, it belonged to him. Panja acknowledged that this was correct. According to tradition, any item found in the labyrinth became the property of the person who picked it up. Still, there was something more to it. The bracelet was actually a cherished item that had belonged to this young man's father and was also considered a family treasure. Panzel looked at them silently. Panja continued, explaining that because of this, they hoped to buy the bracelet back from him at a reasonable price. He asked what Panzel thought about that. Panzel wondered if the bracelet truly belonged to his father. Julius responded with a quiet nod. After hearing this, Panzel decided that in that case he would return the bracelet. He explained that he did not need any money. Both Panja and Julius were stunned by the response. Panja reacted in disbelief at the idea that he did not need money and began to object, calling out to Panzel. Before he could continue, Panzel calmly stopped him and said it was fine. He added that if something belonging to someone's father ended up becoming someone else's possession, it would be a sad outcome. Panja watched him, a thought forming in his mind about the kind of young man Panzel was. Before that thought could finish, Julius stepped forward and offered his hand. He introduced himself and expressed his gratitude to Panzel. Panzel smiled and accepted the handshake. Panja's thoughts drifted back to the mystery. No matter how he considered it, the question remained of where the Minotaur had disappeared to. Meanwhile, Logan hurried back toward the guild. As he ran, memories of Gil surfaced in his mind. He remembered a moment when he had shouted at Gil, believing that Gil had nearly killed him. The flame ball Gil had launched had almost roasted him alive. Gil had brushed it off, thinking that he could simply heal him afterward. Logan had called him a devil for it. Another memory surfaced. They had once been surrounded, and Logan had asked what they should do. Gil had answered with confidence that they would be fine as long as they stayed together. As Logan ran through the village of Mycenae, more memories returned. He recalled their adventures as the years passed and they slowly grew older together. He remembered the two of them arm wrestling. Logan had declared that whoever lost would have to treat everyone. Gil had only laughed and said he would treat all the customers in the shop anyway. Logan remembered Gil once saying that from a monster's point of view, humans were the ones who armed monsters. He remembered Gil celebrating after completing a perfect run. He also remembered Gil congratulating him when he became the guild leader. Logan breathed heavily as he ran. A memory surfaced in his mind of a moment with Gil. He had once told Gil that it was impossible, that it was the first time he had ever met someone as naive as him. Gil had simply laughed at him and told him not to get angry. Gil had introduced himself as Gil Lynx and asked if Logan would become his friend, pointing out that Logan did not have any human friends anyway. When Logan finally reached the Adventurers Guild, he headed straight toward his office. As he entered, his eyes widened and his body began to shake. The image of Gil's face appeared in his mind. His gaze then fixed on the flower placed on his desk. The flower's glow was gone. That faint light had disappeared, and with it came the realization that Gil, his longtime best friend, was already dead. Losing a best friend of many years was one of the most painful losses a man could experience. Back in the Sazerdan Labyrinth, the Minotaur stood while staring at the bright light shining from the exit of the first floor. A thought formed in its mind. The small one had stood in its path, almost as if protecting whatever lay beyond that point. If that was true, then beyond those walls was a place worthy of protection, not a battlefield. The Minotaur considered this quietly. If that was not the battlefield, then where was the place it truly sought? As it climbed higher through the labyrinth, the enemies had only grown weaker. That realization led its thoughts in the opposite direction. The Minotaur turned its gaze downward toward the staircase. The answer became clear in its mind. The place it sought was below. If it continued descending, lower and lower, then surely the battlefield it desired would be found there. The powerful enemy it searched for would be waiting at the bottom. Deeper within the Sazerdan Labyrinth, on the 30th floor inside the boss chamber, the floor's ruler let out a powerful roar. The Minotaur only grinned in response before driving its fist forward and beating the boss to death. The crisis above ground had come to an end. However, the monster had now descended into the depths, where it would continue to grow into an even more powerful being. When a floor boss of the labyrinth is defeated, rare items appear as drops. However, that is not the only reward obtained from bosses on or below the 11th floor. There also drop skills. These are special abilities that adventurers can obtain, though their drop rate is even lower than that of rare items. Even so, these skills have played a major role in making many adventurers stronger. In this regard, the strange monster was no exception. At the 50th floor boss, the lizard man dropped an item known as the Scimitar of Fresh Blood, along with a skill called Warrior's Protection. At the 55th floor boss, the bighorn bear dropped the skill known as Charge. On that same 55th floor, the Minotaur encountered an adventurer party and obtained several items, including a bastard sword, explosive bullets, various potions, and more. At the 60th floor boss, the Crimson Mantis dropped an item known as the Mantis Sickle Sword. At the 62nd floor boss, the Thousand-Eyed Ghost dropped a skill called Searing Breath. Even though the Minotaur did not increase in level by defeating monsters, the experience gained from numerous battles still caused the Minotaur's strength to grow. The growth continued steadily and dramatically. Killing, robbing, attacking, and devouring formed the Minotaur's routine. Everything existed for the sake of the next battle. Inside the 62nd floor boss room, several minutes after the defeat of the Thousand-Eyed Ghost, a man prepared for battle while putting on the different pieces of his armor. According to the information gathered, the Minotaurus would not attack unless someone challenged him first. As the man finished fastening the final piece of his armor, his gaze fixed firmly on the Minotaur. The man was Shelquel Kreganos, a level 57 Class A knight. The seal magician observed the Minotaur and reported that, just as the information suggested, the Minotaur carried a sack. A reaction from Cardan's dagger was emanating from inside it. Shelquel processed the implication. If that was the case, then the one who had killed their lord, Percival, was the creature standing before them. He placed his helmet on his head. The thought remained unacceptable. Gowes and Zariel were ordered to stand down and focus on ensuring the safety of the scout and the seal magician. Both acknowledged the command immediately. The scout struggled to accept the situation. The idea that the knight intended to go in alone seemed reckless. At those depths, every monster present was at least level 70. Shelquel reached into his sack and pulled out his shield. The Minotaur, along with everyone else in the room, reacted with visible surprise. Shelquel drew in a deep breath and then released a loud shout. The Minotaur reacted with surprise. At the same moment, Gaius and Zariel raised their voices in rhythm. The war cry served several purposes. It motivated allies, intimidated enemies, and also acted as a traditional ceremony of the Kreganos clan, a deadly prayer performed before battle. The Minotaur paused for a moment. Then it took a deep breath and unleashed a roar. The force of the sound paralyzed both the seal magician and the scout. This was the Minotaur's skill, howling. The ability blasted away the enemy's physical strength, restricted movement, and inflicted an abnormal status. The power released was several times stronger than before, the result of the skill having leveled up. Yet the Minotaur's eyes widened. Shelquel had endured the powerful attack through sheer courage alone, without relying on any potions. A grin spread across the Minotaur's face as it rushed toward Shelquel. Shelquel prepared himself and firmly planted his shield into the ground. He waited as the Minotaur's sword struck. The shield drove itself deeper into the ground from the impact, but Shelquel remained unharmed. The Minotaur roared again and launched a relentless series of attacks against Shelquel. After recovering themselves with potions, the scout observed the scene with amazement. Enduring the howling was impressive on its own, yet the shield was equally remarkable. Even under a storm of powerful strikes that would normally crush a person into the ground, the shield did not move. Zariel explained the shield's origin. It was Vandessa's shield, an heirloom of the Kreganos clan. The renowned magician Archiel Vandessa, known as Vandessa the Great, had poured his heart and soul into its creation. Although it was not classified as a rare item and possessed no special effects, it remained a masterpiece. The shield represented the combined peak of human knowledge and technology, embodying the ideal form of what a shield should be. Zariel continued describing its history. The successive heads of the Kreganos clan had wielded it while slaughtering demonic beasts and developing their lands. Its size, weight, and thickness were so extraordinary that an ordinary person would struggle even to lift it. For that reason, it was regarded as the ultimate shield. The Minotaur swung its sword toward Shelquel's side. Shelquel noticed the attack immediately and pivoted quickly, bringing the shield around to block the strike. After blocking the attack, Shelquel briefly opened his defense. The sudden change surprised the Minotaur, and the opening allowed Shelquel to thrust his weapon forward, stabbing into the Minotaur's chest. The scout reacted with excitement at the successful strike. Shelquel quickly returned to his defensive stance. The Minotaur roared and slammed its weapon against the shield once again. In the moment that followed, Shelquel thrust forward and stabbed the Minotaur a second time. The Minotaur gritted its teeth and managed to seize Shelquel's arm. As the Minotaur pulled on it, the scout reacted in alarm at the sight of the Minotaur catching him. Shelquel immediately pulled his shield inward and slammed it down onto the Minotaur's arm. The Minotaur's grip on his arm tightened. In response, Shelquel shouted as he stomped his foot firmly into the ground and forced his shield forward against the Minotaur. The Minotaur became disoriented and released its grip on Shelquel's arm. Its body staggered before it fell down onto the ground. The scout looked on with amazement, struck by the sheer strength being displayed and questioning whether a person at level 57 could truly be capable of such power. Gaius explained that the martial arts of the Kreganos clan had been cultivated through battles fought above ground, without relying on any special divine grace. Because of that, their abilities could not be measured by the usual standards of the Labyrinth such as level or class. The group continued watching as the Minotaur slowly sat up again. Shelquel remained calm and focused. He observed the Minotaur's physical qualities with careful attention. Its physique, strength, speed, and fighting spirit all surpassed those of normal individuals. It could even be comparable to monsters found in the range of the 70th floor. Yet, in his view, that alone was not enough. If physical strength alone decided battles, then humans would never be able to compete with creatures such as trolls or ogres. In reality, however, a skilled expert could still overcome them. A fragile human body could be strengthened through tactics, equipment, and trained skills. Through those elements, a person could become a true warrior. For that reason, Shelquel could not accept the claim that the strongest warrior he had ever known, the man who had been both his goal and mentor throughout his life, Sir Percival, had been defeated by a monster. The only way to settle that doubt was to cross swords with the Minotaur said to have killed him and discover the truth with his own eyes. Shelquel inhaled slowly and came to a quiet conclusion that the rumor must have been false. The Minotaur reacted with anger. It roared and swung its sword forward. Shelquel prepared himself and raised his shield. In his mind, the battle would be decided in that very exchange. The Minotaur's weapon crashed against the shield. Shelquel tightened his grip and braced himself for the impact. Yet instead of another strike, something suddenly flew over the top of his shield. It struck his head, fell to the ground, and exploded. Shelquel quickly realized what it was. An explosive bullet. Even so, at that level of power, his Iron Clan defense would not break. At that moment, something suddenly hooked onto his shield. Shelquel reacted with shock. The scout recognized the weapon immediately. It was the rare item dropped by the 62nd floor boss, the Crimson Mantis. Shelquel's composure broke when he saw it clearly. The Mantis' sickle sword. The Minotaur's eyes sharpened as it focused on its weapon. With a powerful motion, it pulled. Shelquel was dragged along together with his shield. He attempted to plant his feet into the ground and resist, but as he tried to pull away, the Minotaur pulled even harder. With one final violent yank, the shield tore free from Shelquel's grasp and flew out of his hands. The knights cried out in alarm. The Minotaur attacked quickly, but Shelquel blocked the first strike. However, he failed to stop the side punch that followed. The blow knocked Shelquel off balance. In that moment he reflected on the armor he wore, armor forged from melted dragon scales, the Mad King's coffin itself. To receive such a shock while wearing it felt unthinkable. Yet there was no damage. The Minotaur seized one of Shelquel's soldiers and inhaled. The scout howled in alarm, realizing the danger. At such a close range, even an earl could not survive being eaten. Shelquel found the situation curious. If he could endure this moment, then the final blow would be his to deliver. The Minotaur paused briefly, and Shelquel steadied himself, preparing to face what came next. The Minotaur suddenly roared directly into Shelquel's face. A sharp pain ran through Shelquel, and he staggered before falling to the ground. The burning breath shocked him. The sensation felt impossible. As the skill's effect spread through him, his thoughts raced. The possibility formed in his mind that this creature might possess drop skills. Gowis called out to Lord Shelquel. Before Shelquel could even turn to react, a shield flew toward him and struck his face. The impact threw him to the ground. The Minotaur roared and then repeatedly slammed Vandessa's shield down onto Shelquel. While enduring the blows, Shelquel began to understand what he was facing. The thought surfaced that Sir Percival had indeed been killed by this creature. Each strike slowly shattered the armor protecting him, piece by piece. A crack appeared. The Minotaur lifted the shield once more. Shelquel realized that the creature before him was no longer merely a monster. The thought echoed in his mind as he recalled his own earlier words. The Minotaur roared again and brought the shield down onto Shelquel's neck, severing his head. The seal magician cried out in shock, and Zariel shouted in despair for Lord Shelquel. Gowis stopped Zariel and forced the situation into focus. Shelquel's last command had been clear. Their priority was the safety of the seal magician and the scout. They had to follow their lord's order and retreat immediately. Shelquel's body began to glow, and then it vanished. The Minotaur glanced at the rewards that remained behind and noticed Vandessa's shield. It moved closer to the place where Shelquel's body had been. At the same time, on the 63rd floor in the boss room, a man observed that the party fighting on the 62nd floor had already retreated. From that, he concluded that the Minotaur would likely descend soon. A warrior confirmed that the area had already been cleared. With no other parties present, the rights to the drops would belong entirely to them. A scout noted that the Minotaur carried a sack and suggested it was probably filled with many items. A witch added that rumors claimed the Minotaur had taken the belongings of the missing Gil Lynx. The rest of the members stood quietly. The man explained that the drops meant nothing to him. His goal was only one thing. The creature he sought was the enemy responsible for his daughter. The man waiting there was Azel Reed, a level 60 Class A magic user. The next opponent waiting for the Minotaur was the father of a former powerful enemy. In the past, ripped paper scattered through the air around a stunned Charlia. Azel looked at her with cold eyes, treating her top marks at the Magic Academy as utterly worthless. As he turned and walked away, Charlia desperately wondered why he would never acknowledge her and reached out to her father. Back in the present, Azel fixed his gaze on Charlia's staff. At the 63rd level boss room, the witch recognized that Yava had judged the time incorrectly and declared that it was coming. She began the preparation chant, Sarmath, leaving the increased chanting speed in Charlia's hands. The warrior stated that Auguste would need to handle defense reinforcement and health regeneration. Auguste answered at once and moved into position. Azel observed everything calmly to himself. All preparations had been completed, and this party was made entirely of advanced Class A members and above. Now they would kill it. The seasoned assassin sharpened his fangs of revenge and fixed his aim on the monstrous beast. Once the preparations were ready, they sent the scout to lure the Minotaur. He fired arrows at the monster, then immediately ran. The Minotaur charged after him without hesitation. As the scout rushed into the boss room, he announced that their prey had arrived. The Minotaur stormed in with a roar and swung its sword, but the warrior intercepted the strike. His feet dug into the ground, yet he felt his own sword crumble under the impact. The crushing strength of the Minotaur forced his stance to slide backward, and he urgently called for Master Azel. Azel instantly summoned Icicle Bondage. Magic circles beneath the Minotaur lit up, and icy vines wrapped around its body. He cast Icicle Bondage once more, freezing the Minotaur completely. The Minotaur struggled to move, but only creaking sounds came from its frozen body. It could not move a single part of itself. The scout explained that Master Azel had prepared a special magic circle beforehand, removing the need for a chant. High-level magic normally demanded large amounts of mana and time, yet Azel cast it at unbelievable speed. At first it had seemed excessive, but that was exactly what should be expected from Azel, the high-speed magic expert and master of blockade. Azel then gave the signal for Hazel. Hazel began her spell, calling upon the cold-hearted judge and seeking condemnation upon a mortal. She ordered the scales to tilt. The judge's eyes shone brightly, and a massive icicle formed above them. The Minotaur's eyes widened at the sight. Auguste warned everyone to take cover before they were caught in the attack. As the party rushed aside, Azel coldly ordered death upon the beast. Hazel completed her chant and unleashed the grand magic, Judgment of Agony. Panic filled the Minotaur's eyes as it gritted its teeth and forced its body to move. Cracks spread across the ice around one arm, then across its face, then the other arm. With a furious scream, it tore free from the binds. Ice shattered in every direction just as the giant icicle crashed down onto it. The adventurers covered their faces from the force of the attack. Hazel judged it as a direct hit and believed the result was favorable. Hazel shielded himself from the flying debris and thought of Charlia. It was never that he had failed to acknowledge her. He had only wanted her to live a peaceful and happy life, far away from battle. Now, he believed he had avenged Charlia. As the smoke rumbled with no sign of the Minotaur, the warrior remarked that Master Hazel's daughter could now rest in peace. The scout then wondered what mountain of treasure might be waiting for them. But as the smoke cleared, the truth was revealed. The Minotaur still stood there, holding Vandessa's shield. Everyone froze in disbelief. Hazel could not accept what she saw. It had been a direct hit with enough power to kill even a Hydra, yet the Minotaur had endured. She could only question what kind of shield it was. The Minotaur let out a breath of relief, then reached into his sack and pulled something out. He hurled it toward the adventurers with speed, and none of them moved away in time. Explosive bullets detonated right in front of Hazel. The warrior urgently called out to him. The Minotaur covered himself with the shield against the blast debris, then roared loudly and charged straight at the adventurers. The scout fired arrows at him, but the Minotaur blocked them with ease. He then noticed the warrior behind him and swung his axe, yet the warrior dodged cleanly. The warrior launched his counterattack, but the Minotaur growled and smashed his shield into him. The impact shattered the warrior's face. The Minotaur then pivoted and hurled the shield toward the scout. The scout barely avoided it, but the Minotaur instantly appeared before him. He screamed in shock. Before the Minotaur could strike again, the scout attempted illusion magic, but the Minotaur cut him in half. Auguste cried out for Zordik and Yaba. Hazel immediately ordered Auguste to raise Great Wall at once. They would cast Judgment of Agony again. She then called to Sarmath to grant them as much increased chanting speed as possible. The Minotaur stomped the ground and roared as he slammed into the Great Wall. Rage filled his eyes as he attacked it without pause. Auguste declared that physical attacks were useless against Great Wall. At that rate, Hazel would complete the chant while the Minotaur remained trapped outside. But before he could finish the thought, the Minotaur unleashed a searing breath. The blast killed the 3 magic users instantly. The Minotaur roared louder and only stopped when their bodies had been reduced to skeletons. Their remains burst into light, and the Great Wall collapsed. The Minotaur heard a potion drop. He turned behind him and saw Hazel dragging himself out of the boss room. He turned fully and began walking toward Hazel. Hazel forced himself upright, then faced the Minotaur with clear anger on his face before running away. The Minotaur did not chase him. He thought to himself that he had won. A powerful and deadly strike, along with a carefully prepared trap designed to hit its target, should have ended him the moment he stepped into this room. But he had won. It had to be because of that shield. Because of that shield, he had claimed victory. The Minotaur grinned as he admired the result, believing he had gained something valuable. But he suddenly stopped when he heard someone remark that if he did not at least bring this back, he would have worked for free. He glanced over and saw the scout he had killed earlier trying to grab Vandessa's shield. The scout struggled in confusion as it refused to move even an inch. The Minotaur's jaw dropped. He looked at the scout's dead body, then back at the now-living scout. His heart began pounding rapidly. He rushed forward at once. The scout tried to flee, but he was too late. The Minotaur slammed him into the ground. The scout burst into light. The Minotaur caught his breath. When he opened his eyes again, he grabbed the shield, but then questioned what had just happened. The moment he saw someone trying to steal that board, anger had risen inside him, along with an emotion he did not remember having. He stared at the shield as realization struck him. It had been fear. He had feared losing that board. The Minotaur paused, then gritted his teeth in frustration. He smashed the shield onto the ground and raged at himself. He slashed and punched at the shield while thinking that a sword would make him strong. The more he used a sword, the more confidence and strength he would gain. But what about the shield? Would it make him strong? Hiding behind it while fighting, constantly fearing its loss. Was that truly the kind of strength he sought? The Minotaur brought his sword down on the shield, breaking the weapon and sending one fragment flying away. He released the broken sword and rejected the thought completely. Hiding behind a piece of wood was only pretending to be strong. That was not the strength he desired. What he sought was strength that could endure any attack and power great enough to break even this board. His own strength. The Minotaur drove his fist into the board with all his might. He gritted his teeth, stood up, and walked away. He told himself to go lower. He had to descend lower. He had to find stronger enemies and even deadlier combat. The Minotaur left Vandessa's shield completely unscathed. Several months later, at the 100th level, the lowest floor, inside the boss chamber, an invasion burned through the room like fire. The bull-headed king trampled over the metal dragon. The Minotaur let out a loud roar, celebrating its victory. Elsewhere, in the kingdom of Bardmost, within the capital of Ladafla, stood the mansion of the ruling family, Merculius. Panja shouted the count as the training continued, reaching 38, 39, 40, 41, then 42. Logan watched Julius and Panzel train under Panja's guidance. After some time, Panja finished counting and called an end to the day's training. While the children rested, he gave Logan an update. After hearing it, Logan understood that the Panzel boy was doing well. Panja confirmed it and noted that the boy's strong memory had been a great help. He had also become useful to Lord Julius. Simply having him nearby seemed to have eased the young master's grief. Panja added that Panzel's sword skills were highly refined, and he had no complaints about the boy's character either. He then mentioned that the child would one day support Lord Julius, and he wished to train him into a key member of the vassals. Logan noted that Panja had taken quite an interest in the boy. Panja paused before wondering if Lord Percival had guided them to Panzel. Logan then spoke of Lord Percival's cause of death, saying the report had been accepted. Panja understood that it would soon be publicly announced as death by illness. Logan saw what that meant. Lord Julius's promotion as head of the family would likely be accepted without interference from other noble houses. Though the truth would continue to spread as rumor, for now, the family could rest easy. Panja then turned to another matter and asked about Logan's hesitation. Was he still reluctant to submit a request to defeat the Minotaur? He remembered the royal declaration. A monster believed to be involved in the death of Master Gil Lynx, a man of great national merit, would be issued a subjugation request, not through the guild, but in the king's own name. Panja continued that, as someone who believed Master Gil had merely gone to a place where the waves of life could not reach him, he understood Logan's reluctance to file a request that would confirm his master's death. Logan clarified that this was not the reason. What troubled him was the reward. Panja questioned the reward. Logan explained that it was too high. Even if it involved someone as important as Gil, it was excessive for defeating a single monster. Without doubt, slaying the Minotaur might lead to clues about Gil's safety. But Logan believed there could be another motive behind why the king issued this request in Gil's name. Panja paused, then asked Logan to listen to what he was about to say as though it were a fairy tale. Logan glanced at him in confusion, and Panja began. In a certain kingdom, under the rule of a certain king, the queen drew his wrath shortly after giving birth to a baby girl. Both mother and child were then placed in confinement. They were forced into the depths of the palace. In truth, that had been the only way to ensure that both of them, especially the daughter, could live peacefully without being dragged into politics. The current king, once the crown prince, inherited his father's feelings. Outwardly, he pretended to despise his half-sister, yet in truth, he cared for her deeply as though she were his full blood. Before Logan could interrupt, Panja continued. One day, the half-sister experienced a miraculous encounter and fell in love. When the king learned who her lover was, he was greatly surprised. The man was the young head of a noble family whose bravery and refinement he deeply trusted. Logan found it hard to believe what he was hearing. Panja continued that when the young man, fully aware of his lover's origins, bowed before the king and sought permission to marry her, the king must have shouted for joy in his heart. Yet to keep her from learning his true feelings, he did not formally restore her place in the royal family. Instead, he married her off under the family name of a distant relative. When the couple later had a baby boy, the king offered no congratulations. He made it clear that they were not to be treated as members of the royal family. In that way, he was secretly protecting the happiness of his beloved sister, as though it were the purpose of his life. That was why news of his brother-in-law's death by illness must have struck the king deeply. Most likely, the shocked king investigated the matter in secret. He likely discovered that a certain monster had killed him. His once happy sister had become a widow, and the nephew he had kept his distance from was now without a father. To the king, that monster had become a personal enemy. Panja explained that the king, however, could not openly move to avenge a single nobleman. Furthermore, the family had reported the death as nothing more than illness. So under the pretense of searching for the whereabouts of a national hero, he chose to request adventurers to defeat the beast. Logan finally understood. The high reward had not been meant to secretly fund the court or government, but simply to match the depth of love and anger. After a few seconds, Logan asked Panja what exactly that Minotaur was, and why he believed such a beast had suddenly appeared. Panja thought for a moment before answering that some things happened in this world far beyond their imagination or understanding. Perhaps, when seen from a broader view, such as that of a god, those events might carry an important meaning. But for those trapped in the middle of it all, their limited sight could never be enough to understand it. So no matter the situation, the only thing they could do was give their best. Logan agreed that it was exactly as Panja said. Julius then called for Sir Logan. Logan turned and asked what Lord Julius needed. Julius said he had a question. Logan reacted with interest. Julius then asked how a battle hammer differed from a sword. Logan was caught off guard by the question. Panja explained that because of its weight, the hammer could only be wielded by the strongest warriors. Unlike the sword, it did not require technique. Its overwhelming power made up for that. Logan twitched at those words and questioned the claim that it required no technique. He then proposed that they test that theory and declared he would demonstrate the techniques of the battle hammer himself. Panja tried to clarify his words, but Julius excitedly expressed that he wanted to see it. Logan then stated that if that was the young lord's wish, then as his caretaker, he had to fulfill his duty. He would do his best. Panja let out a sigh before agreeing. He admitted that, truthfully, he had always wanted to face Logan at least once. He then turned to Panzel and said this would be valuable for him as well. He was to watch carefully and learn. Panzel readily agreed. Back at the Adventurers Guild, several days later, adventurers gathered around the request board. At its center was the subjugation request for the Minotaur. The adventurers were pleased by the opportunity before them. Inside the Sazerdan Labyrinth, the Minotaur threw an axe, then a sword, then another weapon. Surrounded by a sea of discarded arms, he held a massive sword in his hands. He tested its weight, then glanced at it. The Minotaur drew in a breath and began swinging the blade. He continued slashing again and again, trying to exhaust his own energy. He thought to himself that he had already reached the lowest floor, yet his anger had still not been satisfied. Monsters were no longer enough. The only thing that could quench his thirst was humans. Only among humans could he find strong warriors like those he had faced before. Among them, he would surely find the enemy he sought. Back in the boss room, part of the floor began to bubble. The Minotaur turned his eyes toward it. The monsters of the labyrinth were not born from a mother's womb. They rose from the walls and floors like water from a fresh spring. Once the existing ones were defeated, enough time would pass, and the same species would appear again on the same level. Again and again. The Minotaur told himself that if he waited here on the lowest floor, strong human warriors would surely come. The one he sought had to be among them. Then he too needed to grow stronger. He had to sharpen his skills and learn to fight. More strength. More power. More growth. So he could fully savor the time that was certain to come. The Minotaur stood once more before the metal dragon. And it was as though the labyrinth itself had recognized the Minotaur as its new master. 12 years later, at the village of Mycenae, inside the Adventurers Guild, the subjugation request for the Minotaur still remained posted. At the Sazerdan Labyrinth, in the town of Mycenae, stood the hero's right arm weapon shop. A staff member welcomed the customers, while another told an adventurer that the sword he was holding suited him very well. Inside the storage room, a man reacted in shock at hearing they had been wiped out. He could hardly believe it, since they had entered the labyrinth only the day before. From what he had heard, the group sent to subjugate it had been an excellent force of knights. A man with an eye patch explained that there had been 72 of them. 8 parties of 8 people, along with 1 commander, 2 teleporters, 2 healers, 2 supporters, and 1 count to witness the event. He explained that it was a hunting method often used by nobles seeking prestige. If the battle with the boss became even slightly dangerous, they would withdraw outside the boss room and rotate in another party. In that way, they could eat fine food and rest comfortably at the camp they had built, while the boss received no rest and steadily weakened over several days. Once it had grown weak enough, they would surround it with dozens of men and slowly kill it. Everyone who had taken part in subjugating the boss of the 100th floor, the Metal Dragon, even a young lord who had only watched from the side, proudly called himself a dragon slayer. The other man scoffed at how shameless that was. He then understood that they had attempted the same underhanded method again, only to end up dead instead. The man with the eye patch replied that this was their excellency's finest failure yet. The first party to enter the boss room had been wiped out by scorching breath. The other man was stunned and questioned how that was possible. Weren't they wearing equipment with defensive magic? The eye-patched man answered that they were not. They had never expected to face such an attack. Their equipment had been prepared for physical attacks, while their items only covered the howling and abnormal conditions. The other man's eyes widened. The eye-patched man continued that, on top of that, the commander had been casually giving a speech to the next party right outside the boss room at that moment. He was killed exactly as expected. Those men had not even known that the Minotaur could leave the boss room. The other man spat out his food in disbelief. He pointed out that it had already been 12 years since the Minotaur first appeared. Even children knew about its abilities and that it could leave the boss room. He wondered if the story had gone too far. The eye-patched man replied that it had not. If they had known, they would never have used that strategy. It was no surprise that high-ranking officials in the royal palace knew less than what even children understood. The other man agreed. The eye-patched man then said the truly surprising part began after that. After destroying the second party and killing the commander, the Minotaur charged straight toward the nearby camp where the troops had been stationed. First, the Minotaur killed the teleporters, then the healers. Next, he destroyed the barrier items that kept wandering monsters away. After that, no one knew how, but the Minotaur brought a large number of basilisks and hydras into the camp. Both were wandering monsters from the 10th floor. With that, the group of knights was wiped out in the blink of an eye. What followed was a hellish scene of screams and cries as the knights were helplessly trampled. The other man gasped. The man with the eye patch continued, saying that the only survivor had been the non-combatant count who was there merely to witness the event. The count was later rescued by a guild party that came to investigate after regular contact had been lost. By then he had become half mad. He told the entire story to the guild manager, Yatter. The other man clapped in amazement and praised the two-horned king. Compared to that, those troops looked pitiful. He added that he did not know where they came from, but they always acted arrogant and self-important. The man with the eye patch let out a sigh and asked if he truly had not heard. They were the 4th Imperial Guard Division. The other man repeated the title in surprise. The eye-patched man confirmed it. It was the Knight Order made up of the 2nd and 3rd sons of nobles under Duke Riga Alcan. As always, they used noble reasons such as serving the country and the people, but anyone could see that this raid was meant to further strengthen the authority of Duke Riga Alcan, the White Lord Duke, father of the Second Queen, and Chief Minister. But after what happened, he had been brought low. Even so, he would likely keep his position by shifting the blame onto someone else. Still, much dissatisfaction would remain within the factions. The other man chuckled and found it satisfying. The master of the labyrinth himself had dealt with the scoundrels who tried to use his sacred labyrinth for their greed. The man with the eye patch agreed completely, calling the Minotaur a true monster. The other man agreed as well. The other man spoke of the Minotaur with admiration. Born on the 10th floor and somehow able to leave the boss room, he had defeated many formidable foes and steadily grown stronger. Little by little, he advanced to the deeper floors, challenging every boss and defeating them. Along the way, he learned many remarkable skills no Minotaur had ever possessed before. In the end, he defeated the Metal Dragon and became the boss of the 100th floor. After that, even 10 years later, he still reigned without ever being defeated. On top of such strength, he did not attack humans on his own. He only killed those who recklessly charged at him. To the other man, that made him impressive. The man with the eye patch replied that what the Minotaurs sought was not slaughter, but battle. It was almost as if he were a warrior. The other man agreed, then added that he was also a great merchant. The man with the eye patch was confused by that claim. So the other man explained that his master used to say those who worked hard would eventually be able to build great business. Their excellency had also risen by enduring many hardships. But that was not all. He pointed to the town itself. At present, many adventurers had gathered in Mycenae seeking to defeat the Minotaur and gain fame and riches. Merchants and craftsmen had also flocked there to earn money, and for the last 10 years the economy had continued to thrive. In his eyes, all of it was because of the great Minotaur. The true spirit of a merchant, according to his master, was not only becoming rich alone, but helping those around him grow rich as well. The man with the eye patch understood. He admitted that lately he had not seen any hungry children walking around. The other man then enthusiastically suggested they go for a drink and celebrate the blessings and victories of their excellency. The man with the eye patch objected, saying that would be a bad idea. The other man quickly adjusted the plan, saying they would instead cheer for the labyrinth of their king, without mentioning which king they meant. The man with the eye patch considered it and agreed that such a thing should be fine. At that moment, a woman entered and firmly shut it down. It was still noon. She ordered them to stop fooling around and return to work, calling out the manager and Tormon as well. She warned Tormon not to tempt him. Tormon replied that he had not been tempting the manager. The manager apologized and told Tormon to take a nap and wait for him. Tormon accepted. Tormon yawned, but then the manager remarked that if Sazerdan's Minotaur was truly a warrior, he might be waiting. Tormon asked what he would be waiting for. The manager answered that he would be waiting for a human who could face him alone, fight fairly, and defeat him. The day a hero would come for him. Tormon responded that fighting the Minotaur alone was impossible. Even Azel, who had challenged him 7 times after his first defeat and was said to have pushed him to the limit, always brought parties of S ranks and A ranks. Yet he still failed every time. The manager reminded Tormon that it had been their excellency who taught them that nothing was impossible. Certainly, it might be impossible for now. But someday, a powerful person like the Heavenly Sword could appear. Even at that very moment, someone like that might already be growing somewhere. As an example, he mentioned the young knight of the Merculius family, whose achievements had recently drawn attention. Just then, Vienna entered again and dragged the manager outside. Tormon watched the two argue, then quietly thought to himself about the idea of a hero. Several years later, in the royal capital of Rudofara, at the mansion of the Merculius family, Logan told Panja to calm down. Panja asked if he truly looked that restless. Logan replied that this was the first time he had seen him like that since Panja retired as guild leader and became a freeloader in this house. He even suggested Panja learn a thing or two about composure from Master Julius. At that moment, a servant rushed in and announced the return. Panja immediately asked whether the royal orders had been received. The servant confirmed it. Knight Panzel had been ordered to defeat the Minotaur of Sazerdan by himself. After receiving the command, Panzel had already headed to the labyrinth with a witness. It all began with a dispute over the nomination of the next heir to the throne of the Valdemost kingdom. The king wished for the first prince to become crown prince. But it was clear that Duke Riga Alcan wanted the second prince, his own grandson, to claim that position. Because of his power and influence, the mood in the imperial council was initially in favor of the second prince. But the young head of the Merculius family, Julius, argued that ancient tradition dictated the eldest son inherit the family business, and that the same should apply to the country. With those words, the atmosphere shifted completely. Julius gained strong support among the younger nobles. The older nobles, who knew the secret that he was the king's nephew, also did not dismiss his words lightly. Because of that, momentum steadily built for the first prince to become crown prince. Then one day, during the imperial council, Duke Riga Alcan proposed that anyone who could single-handedly defeat the monster that had destroyed the entire 4th Imperial Guard Division in the Labyrinth should be considered a hero of the founding era. The king was deeply shaken by those words. That was because it effectively meant that if Panzel defeated the Minotaur alone, he should become the 25th person to receive the title of Guardian Knight of the Kingdom, a title that had not been granted in the 1,000 years since the kingdom's founding. This title had only ever been bestowed upon the 24 heroes who became the ancestors of the current direct noble families. Whoever received it would be treated as equal to those direct noble houses and would be granted entry into the temple. In other words, if Panzel were to receive that title while serving the Merculius family, the first prince would gain even more supporters. It would all but ensure that the first prince became crown prince. The one who would least desire that outcome was Duke Riga Alcan himself. For that reason, the entire proposal seemed deeply suspicious. However, the king could no longer delay the issue of succession. He could not allow this chance to slip away. Thus, Knight Panzel was officially ordered to subjugate the Minotaur entirely on his own. The chosen day for the subjugation was the day of the Harvest Festival. The reason was simple. Everyone would be occupied enjoying the festival, and no one would interfere. Panja then asked about the witness. The servant answered that it would be Evert Rovell. Logan approved of that choice. Evert was a privy councillor, a trusted advisor to the king, and a highly honorable man. There was no chance he would cooperate with the Riga family in any act of fraud. Panja then asked what conditions had been set for the raid. The servant reported that carrying healing items and food was prohibited. Panja was caught off guard, especially by the mention of food. He had expected Duke Riga to impose severe terms, and he had already anticipated a ban on recovery items. But food as well had not crossed his mind. It meant there would not even be a chance to eat during battle. At that moment, a knight rushed into the room with an urgent report. Troops were heading toward their mansion. From the flags they carried, they appeared to be under Baron Paolo, Lord Borum Nadal, and also the family of Duke Riga. Leading them was the eldest brother, Garist. Logan declared that they had finally arrived, exactly as Panja had expected. Panja stated that the words used for the sake of the country and the people were nothing more than empty phrases the Riga family used repeatedly. Their true aim was to destroy the Merculius family, kill Master Julius, and break the king's spirit. After that, they intended to force him to abdicate the throne and hand royal authority to the second prince. This reckless move clearly revealed the true nature of that family. Logan added that Duke Riga was certainly clever. The greatest obstacle standing in the way of bringing down the Merculius family was Panzel, a man capable of defeating 1,000 soldiers. That was why he had sent Panzel to the Labyrinth under conditions where victory should have been impossible, all to ensure he would never return. Panja glanced toward Julius. Julius calmly declared that Panzel would absolutely win and return. Panzel was his sword. Logan grinned at those words. Panja thought to himself that Julius was right. The reason Julius had remained quietly observant even after hearing of this reckless situation was because he intended to annihilate them. Panja clenched his fist and thought that the Riga family would soon learn the depth of resentment carried by those they had trampled upon. Julius rose to his feet and ordered everyone to prepare for battle. The court of the Merculius family answered with cheers. Meanwhile, back in the Sazerdan Labyrinth, Panzel stepped across countless scattered coins. He thought that it had been a long time, and the Minotaur might not even remember him. 17 years earlier, he had met him and received the bracelet. Because of that bracelet, he had been able to meet the one he now served. Panzel had also been able to heal his mother's illness. She had lived happily and later passed away peacefully. He felt that he could never thank the Minotaur enough. This time, however, he had come under royal command to subjugate him. He would be the one to fight. The person behind him was only a witness. Today, he wished to repay the debt he owed from that day with his own strength. Panzel drew his sword from the sack he carried. He asked that it be accepted, addressing the king of the Labyrinth. Panzel then stood face to face with the Minotaur. At last, the two met again, and the greatest final battle began.